David groaned as he forced himself upright. Cold seeped into his skin, radiating from the glass tube beneath him. His body felt heavy, like it had been filled with wet sand. His head was worse, buzzing and hollow at the same time. A sharp ringing split his thoughts, as if a gong had been struck inside his skull. It wasn't just pain. It was disorientation, the kind that made the world feel 1 second behind. He tried to focus, and the moment he did, fragments of memory flashed across his mind. Not his. Scenes cracked and jittery, like a broken film reel. Faces he didn't recognize. Places he'd never been. A whole life spliced into his brain in violent, blinking cuts. The ringing intensified. David hissed through his teeth and pressed his tongue to his palate, fighting the urge to scream. Then, as always, he defaulted to the one rule that had kept him sane through countless problems. Whatever, he muttered. Thinking is exhausting. The headache only grew when he tried to chase the details, so he stopped. He blinked hard and looked around, and froze. He was inside a sleek steel pod, wired cleanly like something out of high-end sci-fi lab. A curved glass cover hovered above him. Thick transparent tubes ran from the pod into the floor and ceiling, filled with a luminous green fluid that pulsed faintly like it was alive. Underground, a massive laboratory stretched out in front of him, too large to feel real. Rows upon rows of teenagers stood with their backs to him, perfectly aligned in columns. Boys and girls, different skin tones, different builds, all around the same age, maybe 16 or 17. They weren't moving. Not a twitch. Not a fidget. Like mannequins that breathed. And directly in front of his pod, there was an empty space in the formation. A space that looked assigned. For him. David's gaze flicked across the line, then snapped down to his own hands. Something was wrong. His breath hitched. He almost shouted, but bit down hard on his lip until he tasted iron. Still, the gasp escaped. In the stillness of the lab, it sounded like a gunshot. Heads turned. Dozens. Hundreds. All at once. Their eyes locked onto him with sharp, offended hostility, as if he'd spat on a temple floor. David's face burned. He slid out of the pod as quietly as he could, forced his legs to move, and stepped into the empty space in the line. He stood straight, stiff, copying everyone else. Don't be the odd one. Don't draw attention. Don't invite trouble. He coughed softly, trying to erase the moment. Slowly, the others turned away. Only then did David allow himself to breathe. The lab was huge, easily enough to hold thousands. That should have made it impressive. Instead, it made it worse. Glass pods, green fluid, sterile steel, the faint chemical bite in the air. It looked like the kind of place you woke up in right before something cut you open. His stomach tightened. His lips went pale. For a few seconds, fear squeezed him hard. Then logic pushed back. If they were all going to be tortured, these kids wouldn't be standing here in neat formation. They'd be screaming, running, fighting. That thought steadied him just a little. Then, clap, clap, clap. The sound echoed cleanly through the hall. A man walked forward, late 20s at most. Neat posture, athletic build, average face, casual clothes that somehow looked deliberate. Behind him came several people in white medical coats, moving like a practiced unit. Scientists. The man lowered his hands and spoke in a calm, heavy voice. My name is Mu Chun. His eyes swept the room like he owned it. Congratulations. You survived. A murmur rippled through the teenagers, quickly strangled into silence by the pressure of the room. Mu Chun continued, voice steady. Your group had 1,200 candidates. 308 failed the catalyst implantation. That's very good compared to past batches. David listened, but his eyes kept drifting. Now that his mind had settled, he noticed the details. These teenagers weren't from one place. Black, white, brown. Different accents in the small breaths, different hairstyles, different scars. Selected from survivor strongholds across multiple sectors. That alone told him what kind of world this was. A world that had enough danger to justify taking children and putting them in glass pods. He remembered, hazily, pieces of the other memories he'd just absorbed. Public arguments in the strongholds. Families fighting officials. some parents refusing, terrified their kids would die in the implantation process. Others gambling on the slim chance their child would survive, awaken power, and climb into a better life. The poor were forced to hope. The rich could buy odds. Officially, at least, wealthy families paid the government to scan a child's survival probability. That's what people said out loud. But everyone understood the real truth. Without a catalyst, implantation failed. Every time, genes collapsed, DNA unraveled, death followed. Humanity had stopped holding back. Whatever new catalyst the government developed, they released them, selling them at slightly expensive prices to anyone desperate enough. Survival had become a marketplace. David's head throbbed again, but this time the pain came with clarity. The first manufactured catalyst, AA00, had been a breakthrough centuries ago, built by genetic engineers using harvested biological material from the enemy, the rapidly evolved beings. Rep? Even the name sounded like something meant to make monsters feel scientific, controllable. But nothing about those creatures was controllable. Their corpses were hard to retrieve because killing one usually took dozens of soldiers, heavy firearms, cold steel, coordinated traps. They didn't hunt REBs. They ground them down. The earliest test subjects had been death row prisoners. None survived. Too much genetic load. The human gene pool couldn't bear it. Some broke down and could be patched with therapy. Most didn't get that luxury. They either mutated into something worse or died. That failure pushed the world's best minds to unite into the Genetic Association. Years of coding, dismantling, rebuilding, slow progress, until a scouting unit found an unregistered underground lab at the border between human territory and REB lands. Small facility. Horrifying contents. About 30 humans strapped to tables, tubes jammed into mouths and bodies, locked down like inventory. Then the soldiers started dying. Something fast moved through them like a blade through paper. No warning. No chance to aim. When the squad was almost wiped out, the captain pulled grenade pins, choosing mutual destruction over retreat. The explosion erased most of the lab. By the time reinforcements arrived, the creature was gone, but its face had been captured by a suit-mounted combat cam. And in the ruins, under a dead veteran soldier, they found one intact tube of unknown liquid. History later called that soldier a savior. Speeches were made. Monuments planned. The president of the Genetic Association even declared the captain had almost destroyed humanity's hope, while the soldier saved it with his life. The truth, buried beneath praise, was less heroic. The veteran hadn't been trying to save anything. He'd been trying to take cover. The blast threw him forward, and by dumb physics and bad luck, his body shielded the tube from the heat. Accident became legend. Legend became propaganda. And the liquid became a reference sample that allowed AA00 to evolve through countless versions, improving year after year until it became TY13. David swallowed. So that was where he was. Not a prison, not a torture chamber, a graduation line for survivors. Mu Chen's voice cut through again, pulling David back to the present. From this moment on, Mu Chen said, "You're no longer ordinary." David didn't feel powerful. He felt like a kid who'd woken up inside a machine that didn't care whether he lived or died. And the worst part? Somewhere deep in his skull, under the ringing and the borrowed memories, he had the sinking feeling that whatever they put inside him had already started to change him. David was lost in his own head. Mu Chen's voice kept rolling on from the front, but David barely caught any of it. His eyes wandered, scanning the lab, the pods, the tubes, the rows of teenagers standing like statues. Bit by bit, the lazy look he usually wore got wiped clean. His face tightened into something sharper, more alert. He was grateful he hadn't actually died. But waking up in a place like this, in a world that didn't feel like his own, pulled fear up from his gut. The kind that didn't shout, just clenched. A line from an old book surfaced in his mind. A fate worse than death. His heart squeezed as he tried to steady himself. At first, he clung to denial. Stuff like this didn't happen to normal people. Maybe it was a staged act. Maybe he'd been drugged. Maybe this was an elaborate prank. That hope lasted about 30 seconds. The technology around him crushed it. David wasn't an engineer, but he was a tech addict. He'd spent years watching breakdown videos, reading forums, digging into anything futuristic that existed back on Earth. Even with that, he couldn't identify half the equipment in this lab. The devices were too sleek, too compact, too cleanly integrated. Not advanced Earth tech. This was a different level entirely. And the pods they'd crawled out of? He'd never even heard of anything close to them. They weren't just containers. They looked like machines designed to implant something into the body and then force the body to accept it. David stared, half awed, half terrified. Am I in the future, or did I really land in another world? A sudden tap hit his ribs. David frowned and snapped his head left, ready to glare. The boy beside him raised both hands in surrender and spoke quickly, like he'd seen a reaction coming. Sorry, you weren't listening. And you can tell, just by looking at Mr. Muchun, he doesn't tolerate nonsense. The guy was taller than David by a head, with decent features and a calm face that didn't match his chatty mouth. David's eye twitched. He held back whatever insult was already on his tongue, waited 2 seconds, then sighed. Thanks, genius, he said, pure sarcasm, and turned away. He forced his attention back to Muchun, trying to make sense of the words he'd missed. A moment later, the boy leaned in again and whispered near David's ear. By the way, I'm Nihia, Sector B-15, Ferris Stronghold. David groaned internally. Great. A talker. The fastest way to survive around talkers was to give them nothing to work with. So David ignored him and focused on the speech. His head had finally settled. The ringing had dulled, and the borrowed memories, the ones that didn't belong to him, began to organize themselves into something usable. This world had been torn apart by REBs and atomic fire. Humanity had retreated into safe zones, carving the remaining land into strongholds and sectors. Sectors were ranked like social classes. A, 00 to B, 15 were where the rich lived. Comfortable, protected, clean. F, 90 was the bottom, the slums of the Federation. And David wasn't going back to any of them. He didn't know why yet. He just knew in his bones. Mu Chen's voice sharpened. Some of you feel indignant. You were taken from your parents, your guardians, your comfort zones, and forced into surgery and transplantation. But only those who know nothing about this institution and what it offers would think that way. A few teenagers shifted, anger still visible in their eyes. Others straightened proudly, like they were already imagining the power they'd gain. They were kids, after all. Even in hell, they still compared themselves. David's memories didn't contain much about the institution itself, but he did remember the moment the original owner of this body was taken. He also remembered something uglier. The original David didn't care much about his parents because they didn't care much about him. He'd been chosen early because he was strong for his age, almost twice as strong as kids his size. Not his older brother. Him. In the strongholds, normal families were required to give up a child between 16 and 19 to the Institute. To be trained. To become a weapon. To hold the border. To most ordinary households, it was basically a death sentence. Kids who left rarely returned. No messages. No calls. Nothing. Parents assumed they were dead. They weren't exactly wrong. Just not in the way they thought. Only the desperate gambled on the slim chance their child would survive and bring the family glory. Rich families didn't need to gamble blind. They had information. They knew the success rate wasn't guaranteed, but they'd seen what power looked like when it did work. So they prepared their kids early. Combat training, better nutrition, serums, anything to raise survival odds. David's brows drew together as more pieces clicked into place. Muchin continued, voice colder now. I won't say more on that. Now, every one of you who underwent xenotransplantation will feel soreness throughout your body. The process is extremely stressful to the human body and gene pool. He paused, eyes sweeping across the ranks. The TY13 catalyst pushes the human genetic limit. A lot of the teens flinched at the reminder. The implantation pain clearly wasn't something they wanted to remember. Mu Chen's tone softened slightly, almost distant. Those who failed died because their bodies couldn't handle the load. Their genetic codes rejected the genome. Overload. Collapse. Death. He said it like he was reading weather conditions. But David saw it in his mind anyway, pulled from the inherited memories and the horror implied by Mu Chen's words. Bodies breaking down, liquefying, turning into black, sticky mess. Screams trapped behind soundproof glass. The pods were soundproofed for a reason, so the living wouldn't hear the dying. David's eyes widened. This wasn't a dream. This wasn't Earth. This wasn't even close. And then another thought landed, heavy and unsettling. The original owner of this body died in that pod. From pain. David's mouth went dry. He couldn't understand it. Pain was pain. How could it kill someone? He didn't know the answer yet. What he didn't know was simple. If his soul hadn't slipped in at the right time, he might have died too. He glanced down at his hands, then at his body. He felt sore, weak, exhausted, but alive. That meant his soul had entered the body right after the original David collapsed, before the system fully shut down. A tiny gap, a lucky accident. He swallowed hard. I survived by a few seconds. Mu Chun lifted his chin again. Now about talent. The room tensed. Talent determines treatment, and talent is measured by how long the soreness remains. The faster it fades, the higher your talent. 5 phases. He raised a hand, counting them like grades in school. 5 stars, 0 seconds to 10 minutes. Absolute geniuses. We haven't had one in decades, so don't get excited. 4 stars, 10 minutes to 1 hour. Rare geniuses. I hope most of you land here. 3 stars, 1 hour to 1 day. Over a third of you will be here. 2 stars, 1 day to 1 week. Above average. 1 star, 1 week to 1 month. Mu Chen's gaze turned sharp. And if you're 1 star, I suggest you don't advertise it. Unless you're interested in experiencing what a fate worse than death really means in this institute. He paused to breathe, and the entire room broke into whispers.
Hey everyone, Firescale Audiobooks here. If there's a novel you'd love to hear more of, you can support us on Patreon or Ko-fi. Depending on your tier, I'll make extra parts just for the stories you're most excited about. Usually I can only upload 4 to 5 parts of each novel, but with your support, we can go beyond that. And of course, don't forget to hit subscribe. It helps more than you know.
Mu Chan's gaze swept intently at the teenagers in front of him. Even though they were almost 1,000 in number, he wasn't at all intimidated by the numbers. Let me talk about the phases of talent, and since I'm only here to orientate you all, I won't really dive in too deeply on the topic. A 5-star individual, well, they're top secret members of the Institute, and it's literally impossible for any of you to achieve that kind of state. So let's forget about that. Now, a 4-star and a 3-star talented individual would receive special treatment from the Institute, which is written in the book of guidelines sent to your personal tags, and that's all about the talents. You would have to read other information about it for yourself. Smiling, secretly happy about the fact that he dodged explaining a very troublesome long topic to the students. Mu Chun resumed his speech. His tone grew stern as he stopped his previous pacing. Don't even think about faking the talent result. And do not think about lying about the fact that the soreness in your body is gone, as I'm sure some of you are already thinking that way. The soreness you all are currently feeling right now, at least most of you, is called myalgia. It's very easy for us to identify those without myalgia. Well, it's basically very easy for anyone to identify those with myalgia. The reason is due to the fact that most of the body's nervous system would amplify any message sent to it by approximately 50 times or even more. Sensations felt throughout the body would be sent to the nervous system, amplifying the information by almost 100 times, and then the signal would be sent to the brain directly. Mu Chen's voice paused once he noticed the blank look on most of the teenagers' faces. You do not understand any of the things I had just said to you? The corner of his eyes spammed rapidly as he saw the youths he was currently orientating shake their heads slightly, while some just looked down, directly avoiding his gaze. Sigh. I was under the impression that since most of you survived the transplant, you'd be slightly knowledgeable about such things, but looking at your dumb faces, such disappointment. Shaking his head in disappointment, he continued. Basically, it means that the pain in your body has been increased by almost 100 times. That is one of the side reactions to be expected from the xenograph performed, and judging from past experiences, it's totally worth that much of pain for the power gained. Mu Chun paused. His face turned deadly serious. He said, "Now, listen and listen carefully. None of you are out of danger yet, and, as a matter of fact, some of you might really just randomly fall to your death." "What?" someone shouted as soon as those Mu Chen's words landed in their ears. The crowd of teenagers immediately burst into an uproar. They had just barely walked out of a deadly situation only to jump into another one. No matter how calm one is, there is no way they would remain calm in these situations. Even though they had been informed to be respectful when in the institute, the thought of dying still made the teenagers really flustered. The word dying is still a foreign aspect to them. David's heart clenched tightly when he heard those words. Mu Chen's furrowed his eyebrows since he disliked the ruckus made by the students. He raised his left hand to air slightly. The assortment of teenagers immediately piped down, but some people still kept blabbing. Noticing some of them dared to ignore his hand signal, angry Mu Chen stared intently at them. An unknown wave of pressure gradually began emanating from Mu Chen's body, causing the air behind him to distort around his body. His clothes flapped rapidly, as the sound of drum sounded out, sounding similar to a heartbeat. Ba-dump, ba-dump, woo, woo, woo. The air in the surroundings immediately churned out, making his clothes flap rapidly. The wind blew, fiercely forming the faint outline of a certain type of beast, though not clearly visible, but one could make out from the outline of the beast's head, which is that of an eagle, beak equivalent to a sharp sword, the body of a lion, and the faint outline of wings behind it. Appearing very intimidating, the expression on his face shifted menacingly, making him look like a predator looking down at its prey with both disdain and hunger. The group of teenagers who were causing the commotion and those who weren't at all involved in it froze immediately, as they felt their hearts forcibly beat in sync to the loud beat. They gasped in both amazement and fear, staring towards Mu Chen with both fear and reverence. They all thought to themselves, "So this is the reason they advised us to be respectful to anyone from the Institute." Meanwhile, David's eyes popped wide open in astonishment. At first, he thought he was mistaken when he saw the outline, thinking it was an illusion, but upon hearing the shocked gasp from other students, it was real. "Damn, an expert. Is that not a griffin? I thought it was a myth," David whispered as his eyes showed heavy surprise and astonishment. It was a lot to take in. He had just arrived in this world, and now, something he had never even hoped to see in real life just popped up out of nowhere, and that's coming from a random instructor at that. How powerful are the others going to be? If he was that powerful, he would be able to do whatever he wants. And maybe he could even walk this world unhindered, as from the vibe he kept feeling from this world was a dangerous one. David swallowed his saliva at the thought. Although David seemed to have only talked quietly to himself, but Mu Chen, who is currently utilizing his genetic beastly powers and having his ability skyrocketed by multiple folds and also increasing his ability for sound by many folds. His ears twitched rapidly as if they were made of paper. Mu Chen's countenance changed as his brain rapidly processed what he heard. His thoughts process turned blank in surprise, disrupting his concentration, which disturbed his focus, similarly dispersing the beast phantom behind him, which also allowed the pressure he was currently emitting fade out like smoke in the air. The wind also stopped stirring around the stage he was on, making the teenagers wonder whether or not the things that happened in the last few seconds was just a dream. David was still in his thoughts when he abruptly thought of something. If a griffin, which was a myth in the Western continent on Earth, is used by just a regular instructor, then that means there would be werewolves, vampires, hydras, manticores, all kinds of legendary beasts in this world. He couldn't help but wonder why I hadn't been sent here much earlier. Bios, Beast Phantom Master. Someone in the crowd suddenly cried out loud, involuntarily. Oh, Mu Chen was once again stunned, thinking to himself, this group of students are quite knowledgeable. It is quite acceptable if the students are about Beast Phantom Master, since the nobles in each sector of the stronghold has some information about phasers. So it is quite acceptable, but for someone to be aware of the name of the beast he had implanted and constructed into himself is almost impossible, since he himself wasn't really aware of the name before he joined the Institute as an instructor because it was under a Level 4 secret file, only available to those with the same type of authority, which took him years to achieve. Only after he had a Level 4 authority tag did he become aware of the name and the genetic map and the genetic map. And codes did he generically edit and engineer a serum for himself. It was practically impossible for a student to be aware of the name Griffin. He stared seriously at David, but David was currently still in deep thoughts about how he would go about living, was not aware of the fact that he had caught the eyes of an instructor with a single sentence he whispered to himself. Otherwise, he wouldn't be this calm. Mu Chen's mouth twitched slightly. As a powerful person, if he stared intently at someone, not bothering to hide his presence, even a baby would be aware and turn his direction to inspect the person staring. Mu Chen was quite aware that David knew he was being stared at, but he was directly ignored. Sweeping his gaze away from David to the girl who spoke about the Phantom Beastmaster. I'm impressed. Someone actually knows about the Phantom Beastmaster. What's your name, girl? He asked. The girl was stunned. Once she realized Mu Chen was facing her. Then, having thought of something, she looked behind her, assuming Mu Chen was talking to someone behind her. Breathing out a sigh of relief once she saw that a girl was really behind her. Mu Chen almost rolled his eyes from irritation. Stop turning back. I'm talking to you and not the person behind you. As she realized that Mu Chen was really talking to her and not the person behind her, the petite girl blushed as the 800-plus other students took a glance at her. But as a noble child, she quickly regained her composure. Keeping calm, she replied to Mu Chen. I'm Celine Valentine of the Valentine's family from Sector BC-02. She raised her head up proudly while speaking in a loud tone. Her arrogant demeanor returned like it had been there previously. Mu Chen nodded his head slightly, since he had already deduced that only the nobles could have a slight information about the Institute. Mu Chen didn't talk about the fact that David knew about something he should not, because it wasn't the right place and time for that yet. But when the time comes, he would investigate the matter thoroughly. Okay, Celine, good job. Make sure you receive 50 Geno points worth of resources from the duty space in the Institute, but it's non-existent in 2 days. Celine jumped up in joy while smiling happily, although she didn't know if 50 Geno points is an expensive amount in the Institute, but at least is still something. The other students gazed at her with jealousy and envy. Some of them also knew about the Phantom Beastmaster, but they naturally found it beneath them to scream out loud. Mu Chen smiled slyly as he saw the girl happily jumping up in joy. Although 50 Geno points was nothing to him, it's half of what would be given to them by the Institute as new students. If her talent isn't good enough and her myalgia lasts for more than a day, the Geno points would be sent back to him after 2 days, making her unable to retrieve it any longer. He was just practically getting her hopes up for nothing. Mu Chen smiled slyly when he saw the girl, called Celine, happily jumping up in joy. 50 Geno points was nothing to him anyways, so giving it off was nothing to him. But it's half of what would be given to the students by the Institute. If her talent isn't good enough and her myalgia lasts for more than 2 days, the Geno points would be sent back to him with immediate effect after 2 days, making her unable to retrieve it any longer. He was just practically getting her hopes up for nothing. If she wasn't a talent. Mu Chen was smiling slyly as he thought through his sinister plan in his head. Recollecting, he still had some things to say to the students. Mu Chen continued. This week could be considered the most dangerous for you all. No, I take that back. It would be an extremely dangerous week for some of you, just like I was about to say before I was interrupted. Do be careful throughout this week. The pain from simple paper cut might not be any different to being hacked by a machete. Mu Chen gazed at the students, wondering if they would repeat their mistake one more time, but they were quite sensible this time. Shaking his head, I'd advise you all out of consideration for you guys. Stay indoors till your myalgia heals, and also watch your steps, and be careful of who you offend throughout this week, as it might prove detrimental. The only positive side to this situation is the pleasure. Mu Chen's eye lit up, the corner of his mouth lifted up into a sly smirk as he appeared to be thinking of something, making the crowd quite stunned. Almost 100 times the pleasure. One would simply faint from a simple pre-ejaculation. Hee hee. A light laugh escaped his lips. That's all for now. Exit the building, then follow the magnetic pull from your tags located on your left wrist. It will lead you towards your respective rooms. As for now, you're all dismissed. Murmurs broke out amidst the group of teens. People saying things in low voices like, "What does he mean by pleasure, though?" Finally, "Thank goodness, wasted our time for something so trivial," etc. Though, not daring to say it out loud. David was frozen in place, an obvious frown visible on his face. It was deeply immersed in thought. Things Mu Chan talked about like xenogenetic transplantation, talent phases, myalgia genome, etc. left him in a bit of panic. It was the fear of the unknown. But his expression, which was that of shock, soon steadily changed into that of excitement. Seems like this world isn't as simple as I thought it would be. Interesting. David thought in his heart, smiling to himself. Once he thought about the amount of action he would experience in this world, his smile widened, and his heart pumped loudly in fear and excitement. Thinking about evolving and getting stronger wasn't a foreign concept to him, but he had only experienced those in games and not in real life. Thinking about the low probable rate of survival, his smile turned into something else entirely. It was fear, panic, and excitement. He was deeply immersed in his thoughts that he didn't notice someone had stood in front of him, trying to get his attention. I've been trying to get the attention of this guy since a long time ago, but he wasn't actually ignoring me. The dude is just really crazy. Sigh, what a pity, the guy named Nihia said to himself. Before David had the chance to sink further into his thoughts, he heard a voice interrupt him. "We need to get out of here, or we would be the only ones left in here," Nihia said as he snapped his fingers at David. David gazed at him with a perplexed expression and then realized it was actually true when he gazed around him. "Thanks." With that, David turned and also left for the exit. Behind him, Nihia glanced at him with an inexplicable expression. "My intuition might be wrong, but if what father and grandfather said was right, I have no choice then." The words he spoke was a bit weird, but what was more chilling was his facial muscles that kept twitching rapidly as if trying to suppress his original emotion. After a while of pondering and suppressing, Nihia noticed that David had left a while and had exited the building. "Hey, wait for me." He hurried towards the exit of the building with David using the stairways. "So, what's your name?" Nihia asked. "David." Hearing David's reply, Nihia immediately got fired up. "Oh, David, good name, good name. You know, my parents wanted to name me Neil, but then my grandmother didn't quite agree with that. Likewise, my grandfather. Although my grandfather is a bit old, he still thinks he is quite young. The things dementia could do. There was one time David immediately stopped paying any attention towards Nihia. Immediately, Dav and Nihia came out the building's exit. He was overwhelmed by what he saw. Gigantic buildings of different styles and architectures filled his vision. Observing his surroundings, he noticed the street was a bit filled with crowds, people moving in and out of different buildings, and that was the ground. The sky was an entirely different matter. Looking up at the sky, vehicles of different shapes, sizes, and forms littered the sky, zooming past each other in a speedy manner. They flew through the sky like they owned it. The one thing those vehicles have in common is the turbo engine-like thingy connected to both sides of the cars. Some cars connected 4 thrusters to theirs, while a few other has only 2 connected that could be seen from the outside, empowering the cars to move through the air like a soaring eagle at every angle possible, making maneuvers seemingly impossible for them to perform. The holographic image at the top of every building amazed David the most. TSK, TSK, TSK. Holographic images? What next, laser guns? This world is beginning to interest me more, he thought. Originally, the fact that he had reincarnated had taken a toll on his mind, making him a bit sick, as though he was homesick or something. But now that he was getting to know the world he was in, the illness was clearing away like a fog in his mind. In a good mood, David began weaving through the crowds of people with Nihia in tow, following the directions the gravitational pull was taking them to. The thing called tag is a small dot on his left wrist. It is a super microchip inserted into his forearm by the Institute during the xenotransplantation for security purposes. It also serves as an identity tag for students of the institutes and in the outer worlds. Furthermore, it gives informations, serve as a kind of map for the students, helping device, etc., performing various functions. David glanced casually at Nihia, who was still busy running his mouth off. Raising his eyebrows upwards, this guy doesn't get tired of talking, does he? Interrupting him. What do you know about the Institute? David asked him in a casual tone. He didn't feel anything wrong with asking, as he needed to familiarize himself with this world as much as possible. They're saying me lullaby to sleep sometimes cause... what did you just say? Nihia's eyes opened widely as he blinked his eyes rapidly. I said, tell me what you know about the Institute Mu Chun keeps talking about during his speech. David repeated himself with hesitant eye on when he noticed the changes in Nihia's expression. What? Nihia's mouth went agape. He was not to be blamed. How could one be ignorant about the Institute? Before going through the process of xenogenetic transplantation, one would be informed of the dangers concerning the process of the xenogenetic transplantation and things to take note or be careful about. Although they weren't forced by the government to undergo the process, they were given two options. First, follow through with the process and become a student of the Institute, gaining both knowledge and power. Lastly, become a worker of the Institute, since the Institute is in a dire need of workers for odd jobs for a period of time until you retire. The choices made by the reckless teenagers who were filled with passion and ambition about becoming a powerful figure were very obvious, as majority choose the first choice. Noticing that Nihia was truly starting to get suspicious, David hurriedly made out an excuse. You see, during the process, my brain somehow got affected. I somehow couldn't remember some things. Oh yeah, temporary amnesia. I heard it's a side effect that rarely occurs after the process. Now I'd after some thoughts. The Institute was built by the government with the assistance of the Generic Association to nurture young people like us, transforming our lives into becoming more powerful. David listened attentively to Nihia's words. The xenogenetic transplantation we underwent was just the first stage to getting stronger. It prepares our body for the second stage, which involves the engineering of stably fusing other foreign genes into our body. Sound cool, right? Nihia asked while grinning. David nodded in agreement, while still trying to locate his living space, but since extracting information about the Institute is his top priority, he took it slow. After which, they only let us undergo the second stage once the myalgia in our body disappears, and we train our bodies to accept the genes. Once this process is done, the institution allows us to select a genetic modification serum, which gives us different types of ability. Well, I'm not well informed about the process, though, but it sounds really, really cool. Oh, and the training is only for a year before being sent to defend the borders. Nihia spoke enthusiastically, looking forward to selecting his very own genetic modification serum. David frantically absorbed the knowledge spewing out from Nihia's mouth. He analyzed the words from Nihia, breaking them down into simple phrases, and the gears in his brain was rapid turning. One could guess he was thinking really hard at the moment. David, Nihia called him softly. But David wasn't really listening. He was still frantically trying to calculate some things. David, he called out to him urgently as his gaze shifted between the pole protruding horizontally out from the building, which is almost 2 meters high in length, and David is currently walking into it. Most importantly, his head is certainly ramming into the pole if he continued in his current path. Shifting his gaze from the pole to David, who is still daydreaming, he called out to him more loudly. Hey, David! He yelled his name again, but to no avail. Their sensitivity had been enhanced by at least 50 times during this period of time. What would happen if one were to hit his head against a hard object during this moment? Nihia's eyes glinted in expectation, very different from his worried look. Back in the underground lab, a man was seated in a large room, together with a group of people. Their seats they had taken formed a perfect semicircle around that man, facing the man who was sitting directly opposite them. Those people were 13, if one were to count. They were occasionally disclosing some reports duty persists them to give. They were of both genders, age ranging from mid-30s to late 50s. The individual who was seated before them was the eccentric Mu Chun that had just orientated the new students a while ago. But Mu Chun had his eyes closed in his seat, with his legs cross-legged like a boss, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the table before him, appearing deeply lost in thought. Is almost exhausted, and by my estimate, the amount of workers that would be available for the next operation would not be enough to carry out the operation successfully. I personally suggest we take our debates to the table of main institutes. The eccentric Mu Chun wasn't really listening to that report, though. His thought was somewhere else. Amidst the group of people, another person spoke out from the group of people present. Yes, I think that would be a great idea. We could suggest the increase in difficulty in passing the tests of the new students by 100%, seeing as more people survive the operation, almost double the size of TH_. She hadn't finished speaking when she was interrupted by someone else. I disagree. More people surviving the operation is both our good luck and also the students' good luck and fortune to survive the ordeal. Increasing the difficulty by 2 folds, that's just far too cruel. I disagree with such ruthless methods. The man stood up while speaking with an air of justice. The woman who had just been interrupted was taken aback for a second, and then sneered at him without the slightest bit of respect as she responded. Injustice, my foot. It's useless feigning justification. We all know that a little more than 100 of your Klansmen kids are in this batch of new students. Do not think you kept it a secret at all. We all knew from the beginning. The man was stunned. He was about to refute it, but as he looked around, only to notice the remaining people nodding their heads in acknowledgement, while also showing faces of pity for him. Before he could dish out an excuse, a voice interrupted him instantly. Keep quiet, all of you. Not daring to do otherwise, the room descended into silence, and the man quickly sat back down. After a few seconds passed, Mu Chun spoke out again. Transfer the transplantation process clips of every survivor to me and all the information regarding each and every one of them, regardless of their status. Clear. Although puzzled by Mu Chun's weird request, their voices still resounded out. Clear. Not done speaking, Mu Chun continued. Also, regarding the situation of less workers, let the board worry about that. It's not what you've been paid to do. Dismissed. After the last person left the room, Mu Chun eye glinted with greed as he finalized his thoughts. If that kid could determine the name of my phantom beast while only gazing at its rough outline, he could also be knowledgeable about its behavior, characteristics, and even those of other legendary beasts. As Mu Chun thought it through, his smile broadened in a sinister grin. If the kid was truly knowledgeable about it, he could extract the knowledge from him and process them. Become a very powerful expert wouldn't be a pipe dream any longer. Reaching the atavism phase would no longer be out of his life goals anymore. How could he not be happy? Since David knew about the griffin, he would surely know a lot about other legendary beasts too. As long as he could extract those knowledge, he could turn them into both wealth and power. Since it required years of services to the Institute for him to get the genetic map of a single beast, people would work for him if he had more powerful genetic maps. The more powerful the beast was when it was alive, the more powerful the person would become after arranging all of the genetic maps in his or her body and completely merge as one. His social status would rise rapidly as his strength also surges. Maybe one day, when he is powerful enough, he could take on the role as the Grand Professor of the Institute and maybe take over the Generic Association. Now, he needed to plan a perfect move. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Nihia opened his eyes wide. He wanted to see what makes this kid so special. His intuition, the curse that had been passed down for several generations, would activate when he saw him. Nihia shivered, seemingly afraid or excited for David as he knew what was to come. Since David had actually just undergone the operation, his body would be super sensitive to pain due to the myalgia, and even if he was a 3-star genius, since it's basically an impossibility to be a 4-star genius, according to Mu Chun's words. Forget him being a 5-star genius, because there hasn't been one ever since the Institute has been built according to the Institute. Closing his eyes forcefully shut, but sneaking a peek just to witness it. A small ding sound was made as David's head slammed right at the tip of the pole lay sideways. Nihia expected cries of pain or the yowling of a youngster, but all he saw was David's head tilting towards the head due to the force of banging his head against a pole. Coming back to his senses, David looked back puzzled, but when he saw the pole, he just nodded his head and his eyes showed a reaction of realization. After which, he continued to follow the magnetic pull generated from the imprint on his wrist. Nihia stared blankly at the scene. His mind had turned completely blank as he walked together with David towards the dorm. Although he was walking, it was as though he was an empty shell, as if his soul had been sucked away from him. His mind kept replaying the scene where David rammed his head into the pole and then acted like nothing ever happened. His mind kept playing and playing the scene over and over again till he regained his composure. He calmly analyzed the scene as he deduced that either David's tolerance for pain is very impressive, or David might really be a 4-star genius, or the pole might actually be made of paper. But the clear ding sound that rang out when David's head brushed sideways of the pole still rang out his head. It is certainly not a paper pole. But what Nihia doesn't know is that ever since David came out of the pod, he didn't feel uncomfortable. In fact, he felt really great, but a bit sore. David himself didn't suspect a thing. That is until he was hit in his ribs by Nihia, which only caused a mild pain sideways. He began to suspect that he really was 5-star genius, but he threw that at the back of his head since it wasn't that important to him much. What was most important was how he was going to fit in without gaining suspicion from other people. It was already enough with Nihia alone. David continued navigating his way towards his room. From the corner of his eyes, he saw a boy. Nihia was walking together with him. He thought the guy had left a while ago. Glancing at him sideways. "Do you need something?" David was a little puzzled. He wasn't sure if this guy was tailing him because he was still suspicious, but still he continued walking. Nihia revealed a confused expression and asked, "What do you mean?" David frowned. He was beginning to feel a bit uncomfortable with the conversation. David gazed at Nihia intently. "I obviously meant, where are you going? We were supposed to be headed straight to our dorm rooms, but it kind of seemed like you were tailing me instead." Realization hit Nihia instantly, and when he checked their situation, it really seemed like he was tailing David instead of going his own way. Opening his mouth, he explained, "There is a little misunderstanding going on. It seems like the magnetic poles are likely to lead us to TE same place." 'Tis made David pause slightly. The explanation was a plausible one. Well, he would notice if he was lied to at the end. He'd just have to keep his mouth shut and not answer any questions till then. Dav ignored Nihia as he continued on his way, and before long, he entered a street filled with buildings as tall as a skyscraper. Some are even more massive, approximately 400 meters tall, but the most amazing thing about that is their width. They were almost 500 meters wide, which is almost impossible on Earth, and frankly speaking, the architecture is just impeccable. They mixed myriad of cultures to construct the buildings, making them very unique. After a few moments of walking through the streets, David and Nihia arrived at 2 massive buildings. Although the buildings are separated into 2 different parts, which is very far apart. Currently, David's imprint magnetic force was currently tilting to one of the buildings. So this is the dormitory, un? Scratching his head in surprise, he muttered. "A little different from what I was expecting." "Oh, what were you expecting?" "Flying buildings." David heard a very sweet voice of a female sounding out from behind him. "Exactly. Since vehicles could fly, why can't they make the buildings also fly? It'd be nice to live in an aerial apartment, wouldn't it?" said David while expressing his thoughts, still gazing at the buildings. The voice failed to respond, as it was obviously stunned. "Interesting train of thoughts, but you obviously aren't the first to come up with such idea, and wouldn't be the last either." He didn't even turn to the person who had spoken behind him. His body slackened as he relaxed. He certainly did not recognize the person's voice in his memories, which signifies the person as a stranger. The main reason was mostly because of the enormous threat he could somehow feel from behind him. Previously, when a lady started a conversation with him, he would have been very excited and continue the conversation, but it's time, it was totally different. If one gazed at his face, Ani would see how stiff it was. It was as though he was too scared to say a word. There was the possibility that he was still having a side effect from the transmigration, but it was better to avoid such problems because he was still too weak at the moment. Those who survive the operation definitely aren't just your typical nobody, so being a little careful is obviously a wise choice. Oh, David only replied like that. Ignoring the person, David walked stiffly and left the location as he followed the magnetic pull towards his new home. He appeared to be quite relaxed, but if one looked carefully, his almost stiff movement would give him away. As for Nihia, he had walked forwards a bit when David was amazed by the structures. Using her hands to block her brothers from stopping the fading figure, which is David, Phillida's eye flashed with a cold light for a second before she concealed it. Let him be, for now. There's enough time on our hands to figure out his importance. Making a scene on our conscription day would look bad, wouldn't it? Phillida said as she stared at David's departing figure fading through the distance in contemplation. Yes, eldest sister, but I see no reason for your sudden interest in that fellow. He's just a typical guy you see every day apart from him being abnormally conceited to even ignore you. What's so special about him anyway? Amidst the group of people surrounding him, a young, handsome, and tall youth, who was standing directly behind Phillida, spoke out loud. That's exactly what I wanted to find out. Phillida replied in a casual tone, but her voice told cold as she continued. It hasn't even been a day since we got here, and yet you already doubting my judgments? Although Evans didn't reply, his answer was obviously clear as day to all, but his fidgeting little finger betrayed his nervousness. And Phillida seemed to have noticed. Although Phillida was chosen as the leader of the younger generation in her clan amongst her mates, not everyone was satisfied with the arrangements. Brogan, for one, was extremely unwillingly to give up the position as the leader, even if the clan leader chose her for the position himself. So, he secretly informed some of his clan's mates supporting him to subtly give Phillida a hard time. Phillida glanced at the young man, Evans, but she soon chuckled afterwards. Evan, you shouldn't force yourself to do things you can't do. I would spare you this time. Phillida herself could be described as an epitome of beauty. Her soft, small, curvy eyebrows, her light green iris, the most striking part of her body, her red, luscious lips that seemed to pout every single moment, her smooth, ebony skin seemingly soft touch like a golden pearl, body like that of an angel, curvy in both desirable places. Not too much, but also not little enough to be grabbed by only one hand. Her black hair shone with the gentle wave of sunlight cascading down her hair, swaying gently against her shoulders, grabbing the attention of every male who passed by but couldn't greet her due to the amount of followers gathered around her. She was truly a beauty, a true seductress. Gazing at the group of clans member by his sides who was watching her with feverish eyes, she didn't feel disgusted, although they were called family. They weren't exactly directly related by blood, hence the lust. Her voice soon sounded out. It sounded very cold, waking the guys up from their stupor. If any of you want to question my authority, sending someone else to do your dirty job is quite smart of you, but also cowardly. Well, let's go. Clan Elder has reserved the whole floor for us. Let's not waste time needlessly standing here. She turned and she left. Brogan's expression turned ugly as he heard this, but he didn't say anything. Meanwhile, Evan let out a sigh of relief. Phillida, together with her clansmen, separated into two groups. One group, all boys entering the male's dormitory. The other group, all girls, entered into the female's dormitory, with Phillida disappearing from other student sites. Entering into the building, the magnetic pull led him straight into an elevator. The force from his imprint seems to change directions according to his situation. At the entrance of the elevator, he suddenly remembered something and paused. He turned back, only to see that Nihia had climbed into another elevator. He finally sighed in relief. He was finally alone and not feeling like he was being watched. David threw the thoughts to the back of his mind. He went inside the elevator, already containing several people inside. The elevator was almost 5 to 7 meters wide, more than enough to contain 10 people. Ignoring them all, David stood at the edge and resumed contemplating. Since he had transmigrated, there must be a reason for that. It was obvious that someone would just place him in this world selflessly, to just exist to fill up the numbers. Shaking his head, every time he thought too deeply about something, he always felt this strange headache striking his brain. He stood quietly and was expecting the elevator to start moving upwards. He missed the part where the other students each held onto the iron rod horizontally connected to the sides of the elevator. Although he had no idea how he would get to his exact floor through the elevator, since there wasn't even a single button to push. But since no one was panicking, he decided to follow the crowd and stood still. Ding! 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 David frowned. Seems like a warning sign. He closed his eyes softly to ease his headache, about to lean sideways at the elevator, when suddenly, shwa! The elevator swiftly moved upwards without warning, at least for David. Bang! The acceleration speed was up to 50 miles per hour. David's but instantly kissed the floor. The teenagers inside the elevator stared at him in surprise. They all had a single thought in their minds as they watched David fell as the elevator continued rose upwards with increasing velocity. Had he never used an elevator before? Gradually, the elevator began slowing its ascension. David quickly noticed it. David quickly stood up, ignoring the stares he received from his fellow students. It stopped, but David didn't get out yet due to the fact that his imprint was still pulling upward. Someone else left the elevator, but not without staring at David. David ignored him completely, holding on to the iron rod like the others did, after which the door to the elevator closed and then resumed moving upwards. Seems like the elevator knows where we are to stop. How did they even do that? David thought while looking around curiously, but soon enough, he got tired after a few seconds. Feeling the magnetic pull changing its force forwards instead of upwards like before, David left the elevator since the door had slid open, not willing to be intimidated by the odd stares from his fellow student. And before he left, "See you all next time," David said with a smile. Then he exited the elevator. The moment he left the elevator, everything that happened already left him too. Since it wasn't important, he forgot about it. But he didn't forget counting the floor he was in. After walking for a few seconds, David found his room, staring at the written number on the door. 13,248. He felt really happy. He could finally get to his room after so much trouble. Now the only problem is getting into the room. There was no doorknob, button, or anything of the sort. It was just plain steel door. He knocked the steel door, hoping for some kind of reaction, but he was bound to be disappointed. "Open." His voice sounded hesitantly. "Please open," but there was no reaction. He was now getting frustrated. He was getting really tired now. He just wished he could get into his room, have a nice bath, and sleep soundly for the whole free week off. He had been mentally drained from everything that had happened already. But it seems like the door had other plans for him. Bang! Hitting the door in frustration. "That won't work, you know." A little startled at the familiar voice, he turned back, facing the person who spoke. "Do I know you? I feel like we've met before," Dav asked, really puzzled as he scrutinized the fellow before him. He felt the voice was familiar, but he forgot who the person was. "What?" The guy was obviously stunned at David's question, not expecting David to ask that type of question from him. The boy's face turned red from anger instantly when he thought about the fact that someone he was starting to call a friend didn't even really recall talking to him. He gave David a cold stare before saying, "If you do not recognize me, do you at least remember talking to someone a while ago?" David thought while staring at Nihia for a bit, then hesitated, but still he shook his head. "I don't think so." Nihia was livid this time. His breathing turned rapidly, but before he could leave from anger, he heard David say, "Come on, I'm just messing with you. Don't take it seriously." David chuckled, but in his mind, he was panicking. He seemed to have lost some of his memories of a few moments ago. He didn't understand what was going on. Nihia's angry expression faded away like smoke, as though it wasn't there from the beginning. "Do you by any chance know how to open this door? It's really giving me a serious headache," David said to Nihia, asking for his help. Nihia glanced at David oddly after most of his anger left. "Why are you asking? You didn't read the student's guide, did you?" Nihia asked the obvious question. David stared at him like he was a fool. "And why the hell would I read something like that? Who does that anyway?" He obviously wouldn't ask what or where he could get the student's guide. It would instead arouse Nihia's suspicions more. Can you just tell me how I can open this door? It's actually really easy. You just have to hold your imprint facing the door for 3 seconds. Then that's it. That's simple. Nothing else, David said while placing his hands in front of the door. A lightly audible voice rang out to him. Scanning, please wait a moment. Welcome, David. We've been expecting you. Oh, really now? David didn't seem startled by the voice. He had experienced a lot right now. He wouldn't be startled by pretty much anything as of this moment. What surprised him was the fact that the voice seemed to have been expecting him. The steel door opened widely for him to enter, and after saying his thanks to Nihia outside, he closed the door. He didn't wait for Nihia's reply, as he was too preoccupied with his thoughts. He really had to rest otherwise. The side effect from either the transmigration or the transplant would get worse. We checked the interior of his room. It was really simple. Who are the we you were referring to? David said, speaking to the voice in a casual manner while observing the place he was going to stay for more than a year. The room was square in shape and had one thing in common. The 4 wall sides are pure white in color, but there wasn't a single bit of stain on it. It was just pure white emanating white lights illuminating the room. The room had nothing in it. There wasn't a particular source of illumination. The 4 white walls of the room was the only source of light. But it was by no means obvious at first sight, except if somebody explicitly wished to discover where the lights were coming from. That really surprised David, as he thought the wall of the room was a type of screen itself. Walls as screens. Things in this world are still surprising to him. It was very stunning. Yet the color white itself was an exceptionally exhausting and dreadful shading, which made him think about the underground research center he came out from. It likewise made him consider himself been a trial subject. He shuddered, clearing the terrifying contemplations from his head. Who are you, and why are you expecting me? David asked the voice which spoke out earlier when he opened the door. My name is S-. David interrupted it. Just stop right there. I don't actually care who you are nor what your name is. I just wanted to know how you access my room, which is an invasion of privacy, anyhow and why. David said with folded arms while frowning in displeasure. He hated invading other people's privacy, and likewise, he hates others invading his privacy. But his eyes kept on searching through the room for something. That is quite harsh, but since it's your first day in the Institute, you are preempted for now. And as for your questions, we are the AI responsible for this floor, which grants me a one-time authority to override every student room audio frequency, which I've used already to speak with the others. You are one of the few left. David feigned exacerbation. It appears this AI simply needed to flaunt its authority towards them. He lacked the capacity to deal with such things. David filtered his room with a petal-like eyes. Be that as it may, once David didn't see any significant thing to an individual in the room, David frowned and asked, "What is up with this?" He looked a bit surprised as he asked. "Oh, that's the room's default wallpaper. To change it to any color of your choice, you'll have to pay a specific sum of money." The voice replied, but wasn't able to finish her sentence and was rudely interrupted by David. "No, I'm not talking about that. I meant to ask, why is my room empty? There isn't even a bed." "Oh, that. It's made like that, so as to keep enough space for the students to practice with." As someone who didn't read the Institute's guide, you would have to pay a certain sum of amount for that informati dash. David didn't even wait for the voice to continue speaking. He immediately left the room. Nihia was just a few feet away. His face was as cold as ice, and he was in deep thoughts with furrowed eyebrows. Suddenly, he could feel the wind behind him stirred up. As he was about to check what was happening out of puzzlement, he was suddenly grabbed by the shoulders from the back. Glancing at David with confusion in his eyes. "Hey, how can I access to my stuffs in my room?" David asked. "How are they supposed to survive with basic amenities?" "Just lightly tap on your imprint for about 3 seconds, then tell it to detach the bed and the other things in the room. That's all. They were just hidden behind the walls." Nihia answered straightforwardly. "You should really check out the student's guide, as there will be more things more complicated than this," he advised David while lightly patting on his shoulders. I would do that. Thanks a lot. We'll make sure to repay you. Don't wait up for me. I will be leaving." David laughed awkwardly and waved, making a beeline to his room. Again, not waiting for Nihia's reply. He entered the room, closed the door. Pressing the imprint for 3 seconds before he could speak to the imprint, David heard a voice in his head. Welcome, David. Since you are new to the system, it is advisable and compulsory to read the student's guide. Would you start in dash? He would have really wanted to scroll through the manual, but he wasn't in a good condition to that right now. Can you detach the bed for me? Detaching the bed now. The voice instantly reported. Shwa. Light sounds of machinery instantly rang out in the white room as David saw a part of the wall in the room immediately flipped over, revealing its content. In a span of 2 seconds, the roll of metal quickly assembled swiftly with astonishing speed. His eyes immediately lit up as he saw the scene. It was still a bit surprising, and almost everything in this world seemed to remind him that he was in another world. But for now, he needed enough rest, as that seemed to be the only way the side effects he was experiencing could clear up. That was what his intuition told him. The morning sun shone heartily through the air towards the exterior part of the dormitory, giving a slight metallic sheen to the earthy color shade of the hostels, making them look kind of nice and strangely beautiful. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Inside a particular room, the bed rustled as a male student shifted his sleeping posture to a more comfortable one. After a while, the sound of a slight rumble rang out through the room, bouncing off the walls while making disturbing echoes in the room. David's eyes jerked. His eyes shot opened up gradually. He yawned with his mouth opened wide, however his eyes indicated he was still extremely sluggish. As he was going to close his eyes once more, the slight thunder sounded out again, however this time in a progressively furious tone. That was an extraordinary rest, Davy thought, as he propped himself up from his bed. Guess I'm really hungry, caressing his rumbling stomach, speaking to the imprint located slightly below his wrist. A compartment detached itself from the wall. A network of connected machinery rapidly arranged itself, revealing a 1-meter-sized mirror. Sitting beside them was a bunch of tools needed to clean himself up nicely. Also on the other side of the mirror was a small compartment with a hole in it, which DAV speculated was a type of waste bin. He took his bath soon afterwards, which was a weird experience for him, but it was quite nice. He left his room hurriedly, his stomach almost rumbling in sync with his footsteps. Upon following the pull of the imprint, he reached the cafeteria only to realize that it just opened like a minute ago. There was no food available yet. Seems like he had arrived too early. Sitting in one of the chairs in the cafeteria, he noticed he was the only one in there at the moment. Although it was a bit strange, he didn't think too much about it. He had decided to wait until the food was available, but until then, he intends to find out what the student's guide is all about, as it places him in a tight spot the previous night, and also how to operate his imprint. Applying pressure on the imprint for approximately 3 seconds straight. Good morning, David. Hope you enjoyed your days of sleep. The robotic voice of his personal AI rang out through his mind. Of course I did. Thanks for asking. Although it was only a computerized reasoning, it hurts no one to be polite to it. Wait, what do you mean by days of sleep? David asked, somehow confused by the words spoken to him by the AI. David was a really perceptive person. Thinking outside the box and noticing what others rarely notice, he was really good at that. The duration of your slumber was 52 hours, 12 minutes, 5 seconds, which is approximate 2 days, hence the word days. The robotic voice answered. What? He was stunned. David's voice was raised an octave higher than usual. He was truly freaked out. The fact that he had slept for 2 days straight surprised him, and honestly, he currently still wished to sleep a bit more. Although he loved sleeping like really, but that doesn't indicate he would be blinded by it. Who falls asleep for 2 days straight without eating anyways? Breathing in deeply, he calmed his nerves. What seemed to be the problem? David asked the AI. I can't seem to comprehend your question, it replied. Right, I forgot it was an AI. David thought. I slept for 2 days straight. Is that normal? David stated his problems to the AI. Although slightly abnormal, it's still considered okay. It was stated that, due to the process undergone by the students, stressing out the limits of the human body, the body would need certain amount of rest. Sleeping for a day, and maybe 2, is perfectly normal in order for the body to regain its energy. although 98.7% of the students woke up after a few hours of rest. I'm a very special being, so doing special things should be expected. David comforted himself. Now, can you kindly inform me what actions I must perform to operate my imprint? And how the hell you are talking straight to my head? He had just registered he had a voice directly speaking through his head. To operate the imprint, you just have to switch to the manual mode, which would decrease my rate of activities to grant you access to the system. The reason I could communicate to you straight to your head is due to the Rotfeld principle. It's the combination of different complex theories and theses on vibration and frequency. Several centuries ago, the entire human genes available in the genome was read and edited by the conjunction of many genetists from different parts of the world. They came together to form great inventions, theses, and theories, and one of those theories is the Rotfeld principle, which generally allows for telepathic communication through physical contact, gene frequency deciphering, and electro-brainwave frequency matching. The AI concluded. Silence reigned in David's head, not hearing any robotic voice. "Goodness, are you done?" David finally asked, exasperated. "You don't appear to understand the standards," the AI inquired. "No, I didn't cause you lost me there at Rotfeld principle," he replied bluntly. Switching to Rotfeld principle explanation for dummies. In layman's term, it basically means reading the frequency your brain uses to receive audio waves and then matching it to send message through the same brainwave. I think I get the gist of it. Before he could continue, a loud buzz sound rang out, indicating the availability of food. Seeing as the food was already available in the cafeteria, DAV hurriedly stood up for his. Standing before the machinery, he raised his hands up as he was told to. His imprint was scanned, then instantly his food popped out from an available space in the machinery. David stared blankly at the box of sticky fluids on the tray. He couldn't comprehend what just happened. David stared blankly at the box of sticky fluids before him. He still couldn't comprehend how this was food. I need food, not this, all right," DAV stated foolishly at the block of machinery before him. "Since your star haven't been graded as of yet, that's what any grade-less student of the Institute gets." A voice spoke out from the machinery. DAV recognized the voice as the AI, who said it had been waiting for him 2 days ago, trying to flaunt its authority. "And how do I get graded?" David asked. He was already pretty tired about this world's complex way of life in the Institute. If you were adamant about not reading your student's guide, you could just pay a certain amount of money for answers to certain questions. The cost of the answer to the question you requested for is 3 gyno points. Cheap, right? The voice stated. David couldn't be bothered to speak with a money grubber who was bent on collecting gyno points for a simple piece of information. Applying pressure on the imprint for 3 seconds. "Direct me to the place where I would be reviewed." David walked out of the cafeteria without looking back, but not without taking the box of sticky fluids in it. He was still hungry after all. David stepped into the elevator, but not without muttering out a curse. He hadn't forgotten the way the elevator embarrassed him in front of his mates. He waited until the elevator took him to the 2nd floor, which was the floor the magnetic pole also pointed at. He had always wondered if the elevator reads people's mind, as it seems to know which floor whichever person wanted to stop at. Although he wondered, he didn't have time for that yet. He had to get himself graded as soon as possible. The taste of the sticky liquid was horrible. David's mind shuddered as he threw the empty box to the waste bin in the elevator. Although he hated the taste, he was really hungry, so he didn't even notice when he finished it. All he knew was that it had an horrendous, silky, and salty taste. Exiting the elevator, he hurriedly made his way to the review center. He made his way there very easily, as the other students were just waking up at this point in time. Opening the door to the review center, he was instantly surprised by the immediate surroundings. It was all white, the same as his room's default wallpaper. The tip of his eyebrow instantly rose upwards. "Isn't it too early to be here at this time?" A slightly flat but annoyed voice sounded out, distracting David from his observation. DAV immediately looked forward. His expression soon changed into an as-expected expression. The person behind the desk had the same posture, expression, and even the behavior of those who works behind the desk on Earth too. For example, the slightly pot belly peeking through the hole from the midsection of the desk. Also, the I don't give a F asterisk expression the man had. It made David miss Earth a bit. Just a bit, though. Hi there, not really, David replied, sounding a bit confused. Anyway, I'm here to get myself graded, David stated. The man was instantly surprised. Although DAV wasn't the first to get grade in this batch of students, he also wasn't the second and certainly wasn't the third to be graded among the students of the Institute. But he was definitely among the top 200 talented students of this batch of recruitment. Oh, you should have just said that earlier, mister. As though I was given the chance to talk. David thought in his heart. I'm David. You could just call me DAV if you wish. David replied while strolling inside the room. I would call you Davy, then haha. Please sit. The man responded with a laugh this time, quite different from his earlier moody expression. You just have to go through the test first before I can grade you officially. By the way, I'm Johnson, but you can also call me Mr. John if you'd so wish. John bent down from his seat. When he stood back up, he was holding a type of technological bracelet. Holding it towards David. Place it in any of your wrist. What is this exactly? David was a bit skeptical. He got seated. It's nothing really, it just helps us confirm if you're really no longer affected by the myalgia. John replied truthfully. You would feel a slight pain, mind you. John added, okay, let's get this over with. David wore the bracelet on his left wrist. Now what? Puzzled, nothing happened. Do not be impatient to dash. BZZT. Electric energy flashed as the electrical current was discharged into David's body. Oomph, that really hurts. DAV groaned and clenched his teeth rightly to endure the pain. Does it really have to be this painful? DAV complained as the pain faded from his body while removing the test bracelet from his wrist. What was that for? David said as he glared at the pot-bellied man before him. Sorry about that, DAV. I'm just following protocols. John replied to David being apologetic. Retrieving the bracelet from DAV, he kept it back to its previous position. So did I pass the test? David questioned, rubbing his wrist gently. Of course you did. Splendidly, in fact, John smiled. Great, what if I didn't pass? Hee. Let's just say you wouldn't be. Here to ask any questions, DAV. John grinned as he relaxed his chair. David instantly understood what he meant. The myalgia would increase one's sensitivity by a lot, and if one were to be electrocuted by the bracelet during that time, it was death straight away, no hope of survival. David frowned as he felt it was way too cruel. But it wasn't really his business. He just needed to know his grades. So what's my grade? He asked impatiently. Do not be impatient, DAV. You're now a 3-star talented student, and as a 3-star talented student, there are some private privileges specially reserved by the Institute for students as talented as you are. You can read the student's guide for more information. John beamed. An holographic image with 3 bright stars emerged from John's desk. John reached out to them. He grabbed at the 3 stars before swiftly throwing them along Dav's direction, directly towards his imprint. David was shocked as he thought he was being attacked, but the 3 stars just disappeared into his imprint, as if being absorbed into it, as though nothing had ever happened. It was a fascinating sight. Fascinating, but why 3-star? Why not 5-star? DAV questioned subconsciously, as he rubbed his imprint, still marveled by the previous scene. John's smile instantly froze as he gazed at DAV with a deadly stare. Get out now, John said in a deep tone, struggling to keep himself calm. He had mentioned 5 stars like it was nothing. If 5 stars were that common, the Institute wouldn't be bothered with those THRE star students. Okay, I was just asking out of curiosity anyway. No need to be that hard in me. Trying to defending himself, David raised both his hands up. Leaving the now angry John's office, David headed straight back to the cafeteria. Although people are out from their beds already. Upon getting there, DAV had to wait in line for his turn behind some groups of teenagers. Finally his turn, he stretched his hand, which has the imprint in it. You have already withdrawn your morning meal today. Please kindly step away from the line or pay a certain fixed amount of gyno points to purchase the types of food available for sale. The familiar robotic voice sounded out. F*CK. You call that SH*TTY liquid food? What else do this world call food over here? Never mind. I don't want to know, DAV. secretly muttered. DAV left the cafeteria in anger. He reached a certain spot in the current floor. He sat down to catch a breather at a bench he found at some point. He could see some students walking while tapping into the air rapidly. Some were even tapping furiously at what David can only describe as rays of lights. He was only able to see multiple rays of light and was confused why the rest of the students would do that. After a moment of realization, David raised his arm up. Applying pressure on the imprint for 3 seconds, he called to his personal digitalis computer. "I want to see my own personal holographic image," David said. He needed to get used to this world quickly in order to avoid suspicion. Switching to manual mode. "Please wait a moment." Initializing. 50 seconds to completion. "Please wait." An holographic image tore the air, visible only to David due to the fact that it had been registered and coded with his gene prints, making it quite impossible for others with different genetic make-up or codes as him to view its contents. David was thoroughly intrigued since it was his first time with such technology. Gazing at its contents, David saw a few series of options. Okay, maybe not few, it was a lot than he was used to. The options were all just placed randomly that David almost felt his brain buzz in exhaustion. It was much different than that of the handphones on Earth. Too messy. Arrange all of the information according to each categories they belong to. David hurriedly stated. He couldn't help but wonder. They created an awesome tech like this, but they couldn't even place the information in a proper order. DAV frowned, obviously a bit confused. Confirmed. "Please hold on, David. This would only take a few seconds." His AI replied. The AI in his imprint rapidly got to work as bits and pieces of information started gathering at different specific locations. What surprised DAV, though, was the fact that they really looked physical, almost as if he could feel them, even smell them. Interesting, David thought with a smile on his face. With his command taking place, he finally got the system arranged as easily and as best as he could, and after a few minutes of thorough adjustment, it looked more like the ones in handphones back on Earth. Now, I can't keep calling it my personal AI now, can I? What name should I give her? Lizzie? Sounds common. How about Eliza? DAV contemplated while the fingers of his left-hand fingers kept moving, as if he had something he kept twirling between each fingers. I get it now, Hazel. David smiled proudly. It was the first time he came up with a good name. Since we would be together for the better part of the years, I have thought of a name for you. David was still on the bench as he continued twirling his fingers. That is incorrect. I'm a property of the institution given to assist the new students to help cope with their situations, just for a certain period of time. The AI's robotic voice interrupted David before he could continue. David couldn't help but frown upon hearing those words. He had assumed that after graduation, the students would be allowed to take some certain things from the institute, but it seems like he was dead wrong about that. Process complete. Please check. The AI's voice rang out once more, pulling DAV out from his speculations. His imprint shone a light blue light as the holographic images took to the air. The contents wasn't as messy as it has been previously, and with his tampering, it was close to perfect for his taste. David tried tapping it. His hands felt like they touched something solid. He could really feel the smooth texture of the border lines. David gasped in amazement. The technology of this world had really advanced by several degrees. Although he wasn't aware of the mechanism used, that didn't stop him from admiring it. Tapping open the library icon, a row of books instantly appeared before him. It was as if he was in a real library. Not really a fan of books, David dropped it, returning to his homepage. He saw my status written on one part of the screen. That sparked Dav's curiosity. He tapped on it. Name, David Syntax. Age, 16. Gyno points, 100. Stage, Sprier. Talent, 3-star. Exercise manuals, non. Gene, non. Blood cycle, 1 cycle per 3 minutes average. Enhancements, non. Combat techniques, non. Current condition, quite healthy. Evaluation, too weak. As a new student, there are different opportunities to improve. An O sound escaped his lips. He was pleasantly surprised at the status, but was also disappointed at the comment left behind. It contains things he was already aware of. For example, It contains information about his talent grade, which he already knew as 3 stars. Likewise, it contained information about his height, weight, and race. Sweeping his eyes through the status panel, DAV saw something different. There was an additional gyno points written there, which indicates that he currently has 100 gyno points left in his account. He had been wondering what the hell gyno points was after the money-grumbling AI tried extorting of them, but he forgot about that after. He clicked on the gyno points, and the description popped up, which stated that it was the currency currently used in the Institute, and as long as one has enough gyno points, one could purchase literally anything from the Institute, which earned a raised eyebrow from DAV. It made him quite skeptical about it, but since the Institute allowed that sentence in his status page, it might seem to be true. Before he could do anything else, he heard a familiar voice call out to him from beside him. "Hey, David." Nihia ran towards DAV swiftly. "Oh, hey." DAV replied back casually. He was engrossed by the functions of his interface, and he also had the mind to stroll a bit around the Institute, trying to get used to the Institute as fast as possible. Since he had enough time on his hands, he wasn't really in a hurry. "Where have you been all this while? Searched for you throughout the whole of yesterday, but I couldn't get a single glimpse of you." Nihia was a bit angry. He really had a good reason for searching for David. He had been looking for him since yesterday, but to no avail. But now he saw DAV. The guy obviously didn't appreciate him coming to meet him. "I was looking for you to inform you that the Institute had started lectures since yesterday. We were deceived by them. I don't really know why they would do something that devious, but it is slightly obvious they want to keep some people out from attending the lectures. The week-long holidays is obviously a trap from the Institute. I've contemplated for a very long while, but I still couldn't find out what they would gain from doing something like that. They would only lose potential students. Not all the students knows about this information, though. Only a selected few knows about the information, and even I knew about it only because I mistakenly eavesdropped on someone's conversation." Nihia rambled on and on. David stood there, listening to what Nihia had to say. Instantly, his heart lurched and he frowned. If what Nihia said was true, then there was something else going on. He really hated being deceived by people. David thought things through, and after a while, he immediately came up with some speculations. Those who failed the exams and also couldn't attend the class would be disqualified and then turned into labor workers for a few months as punishment. The Institute needed more labor workers, which was why they were willing to deceive people, so that after a week holiday, the ones with slightly more mediocre talents wouldn't be able to keep up, causing them to fail the courses, exiling them to a lifetime of workmanship. As David thought if this, his eyes squinted immediately. It seems like the Institute wasn't a really peaceful place after all. Just the first week, and something like this is happening. His second speculation was that the students would get an enormous amount of gains if they attend the Institute for this week. Although he wasn't really sure which is which, either of the two options won, nothing would stop him from attending the lectures. David instantly felt a headache coming in. Things really won't be easy here. David instantly felt a headache coming up. He wasn't sure about their plans yet, but he wouldn't let that affect him. "I'm telling you, this might be some insane stunt the Institute is trying to dash. Do you know where the lessons are taking place?" DAV interrupted the still, rambling Nihia. "No, I don't," Nihia replied. DAV looked at him with his eyebrow raised. "Did you not go for lessons yesterday?" puzzled David asked. Nihia immediately grew furious, his head fuming with smoke and anger. "Of course not. I've been searching everywhere for you. Sorry about that. I was really busy throughout the day. I couldn't get hold of you. Thanks for that anyways." Although David still wasn't sure why Nihia was doing this, he still thanked him anyways. Nihia, who was on the verge of exploding, calmed down a bit. David's looks wasn't worth calling handsome. He is as ordinary as a passerby one would see in a marketplace, one without any remarkable features. While his droopy eyes might let one remember him, at least. Glaring at David angrily, Nihia breathed out loudly. "Phew, your schedule should have been sent to you already, if only you would just check your inbox." Nihia exhaled. Although I don't think some of the students are aware of the fact that they had their schedules with them all these while. It's as though our imprint had been defaultly silenced. Nihia pondered. David's hand, that was about to summon his personal interface, paused when he heard that, but he resumed subsequently. Calling forth his interface, he checked his inbox, thereupon containing different messages. From the Institute, mostly. He inspected them just by sweeping his gaze roughly, scrolling down when he saw not what he sought after. After a moment of searching lightly, he found what he was looking for. It turns out the schedule was hidden amidst the countless welcome messages sent from the Institute. Rolling his eyes at such deception, David took the schedule with hands. He opened it like it was a real sheet of paper. It was almost like virtual reality mixed together with the real life. He still couldn't help himself from being amazed. Prying open the schedule. As he kept reading, his expression kept changing. From his previous amazed gaze, his expression fell gradually, just like a chocolate beaten by the sun. One time, Nihia couldn't tell if he was either laughing or crying. "What tight schedule?" David shouted in his head, throwing the schedule out in anger. "Are you sure you want to permanently delete this message?" A message instantly popped up from his interface. David stared blankly. A few seconds passed. He replied, "Of course not," and placed that thing as top priority. David said after some thoughts. His headache was already becoming worse. Nevertheless, he didn't have to look up to know Nihia was on the verge of laughing. "Go ahead." David looked elsewhere. "Really?" Nihia was skeptical, but he just couldn't hold it any longer. "Ha ha ha, why you can't, Clutching his stomach, he almost laughed his guts out. He just couldn't stop even after a minute. Since the time David asked him, the first time in the dorm, to withdraw his bed from wherever it was hidden, he had known David really loved his sleep. But now, he wouldn't have enough time to sleep. David stood there, staring expressionlessly into space. The schedule he saw almost made him lose his mind. There was not a single day of rest throughout the week. Even on weekends, they were to have lessons every single day in a week. For a whole 3 months, which after there would be tests every week, they would be given 2 days of rest. Then they'd be tested based on what they had been taught. But the main point is that David wouldn't have enough time to sleep, as lesson starts as early as 6 a.m. in the morning every single day and ends at 6 p.m., giving the students enough time to study or practice, or so the Institute thought. And the breaks only last for about 20 minutes, not enough time for DAV, who likes to slowly savor his food, and eating to his fill would take more than an hour. However, would he cope from now on? Davs expressionlessly thought. If it wasn't for the fact that the curriculum has been circulated through his batch, he would have thought that someone was specifically targeting him. Shifting his line of sight toward Nihia, who was just getting up from the ground having finished laughing. "Ahem. Thanks, I'm done." Nihia dusted his body. "You are welcome. What's on your schedule for the morning?" Regaining his countenance, David asked while navigating his way out of the building with Nihia in tow. "Combat practice." "You?" Nihia replied. "Same." David replied with a raised eyebrow. "Surprised? Looks like we are stuck every morning for 3 months, isn't it?" Grunting, David picked up the pace. "Hazel, the route towards my first lessons. Lead me there." David spoke to his imprint. Stepping into the elevator, he descended towards the last floor of the building. Exiting the building, David checked the time, 7 a.m. They were late by an hour. "How much time would it take to get to the combat field based on my current speed?" David asked, his left hand towards his mouth, jogging towards the combat field with Nihia tow, while mostly with Nihia complaining. 2 hours, 14 minutes, 43 seconds. DAV instantly staggered, Nihia almost bumping into him. That long. David immediately stooped uncontrollably. If he had made the mistake of not asking, he would have cried himself to death. "What's wrong with you?" Nihia asked, confused. "Nothing. Do you by any means know how to get there faster? Uber? Taxi?" Tilting his head slightly. "Yes. That's what I've been trying to tell you." "What do you mean by Uber and taxi?" "Someone you know." Nihia stared at David, shaking his head. It's nothing. Just answer the question." David was getting rather impatient. "All right, let's just call for a lift then." "Almost forgot. Have you been graded yet?" Suddenly remembering something, he asked David. "Yes, but can you just call the lift?" "Okay, I will calm down." Nihia stood motionlessly staring at space for 30 seconds. David stared blankly at him for the whole duration of 30 seconds at a loss for words. As realization hit him, He instantly wanted to roar out in rage. Was this guy joking with him? What did this guy take him for? He wasn't able to, though, as a shadow loomed over them, prompting him to raise his head in confusion. The shadow got much larger as it came closer to them, almost causing David to panic. He suddenly noticed the 4 thrusters at the sides of the object that was coming over them. He suddenly remembered seeing something like that earlier. It seems Nihia really called for a lift and wasn't standing blankly there for no reason at all. The sky cruiser landed steadily and softly in front of David's slightly ajar mouth, wherein the thruster's output slowed down considerably as bursts and streams of energy and fire reduced. The sky cruiser could be called splashes of color. It contains most of the primary colors: blue, red, white, etc., showing how ragged it was. It has an oval-shaped forefront exterior, which is painted black. The 4 thrusters painted blue, the top of the sky cruiser, another color entirely, and basically the sky cruiser was a mess of colors too ugly to even glance at. It was the size of a big bus. The flank, which David assumed was the hatch, slid open upwards with a mechanical sound. Whoosh! A shadow gradually began to emerge from within the commercial cruiser. What came out from the hatchway was a beauty. At one section of the Institute, in a luxurious office that one might call neither plain nor over-decorated. It was just a little over the top. In the room, a man could be seen sitting on the chair, directly in front of the desk, casually sway the omnidirection seat left and right. He had an average face, looking around late 20s, with black hair with a long ponytail. His eyebrows were also thick but short, looking a bit weird or unique maybe. That man is Mu Chun. He was operating his personal interface. While others would only see him tapping at a wide beam of multicolored light, Mu Chun's personal interface had been genetically modified according to his genes and brainwave, allowing only him access to view the information contained herein. It was the same for everyone. He was busy making arrangements for the next batch of cadets to come. It takes an extreme amount of calculations and arrangements to successfully guarantee a high success rate. Mu Chun is someone who doesn't like other people do something for him, since he prefers doing it himself. He believes that to perform an important job to one's perfection, it's best to do it by oneself. So unless it's a simple matter, he sends his subordinates to do the job for him. But if it involves an important matter, he prefers to the job himself. A light sound rang out, making him pause his hands. Swiping his hands sideways, a message was sent to him. Taking the message by hands. If it was not for the illumination coming off the message, he would have been deceived to thinking it was a real paper message. Opening the message, his eyes began sweeping through the message, scrutinizing it as if his life depended on it. But his expression changed from his normal expressionless face to slight confusion. He was really confused. According to the information written in the message, it states that David was just from an ordinary family of 6. David, as the second-born, has an older brother, Derek, who is currently 21 years old. His favorite hobby is reading and currently working as an engineer for a big company in the inner world, taking after the father. The pride of the family. David also has 2 younger sisters who are identical twins, currently 13 years old. One whose attitude is cold, and the other who has a fiery attitude. Quite opposite characters for a twin. Mu Chun didn't care for that at all. What he really minded was the fact that David was just your ordinary average teenage boy back at the inner world. He goes to high school every weekday, comes back 3 p.m., goes to work at a mechanical shop at 3:30 p.m., comes back home 7:30 p.m. That was all he did throughout his stay in the inner world. Although he had friends, he didn't consider them as friends, as he prefers being alone. A loner. There was nothing special that happened in his life. Well, one did happen, and that was when his brother Derek got a job in a big company with huge salary. But David and Derek weren't all that close, so saying it was a special moment in his life was a bit far-fetched. He wasn't especially close to his father Damon, and also his mother Aaliyah. Although David's father Damon is an engineer, he wasn't given a job to work in a huge company, but nevertheless, they were above the average families in their sector. His mother Aaliyah works as an assistant to some big-shot family in the sector, not having enough time for the family, but was the one providing mostly for the family. Muchin still didn't think of that as an important aspect to him. What he was mostly interested in is David's knowledge. How he gained the knowledge he had about the Griffin was what he was most interested in. Now, reading through the report, it basically states that David was nothing special. Even his family is nothing special. So where he got the information about how to recognize a Griffin was still a mystery. The knowledge would not have come from nowhere. Interesting, I love challenges. Mu-chan touched his non-existent beard, stroking it as if there really was a beard there, thinking of the ways to solve the puzzle in the form of David. Seeming to have thought of a plan, Mu-chan smiled to himself, bursting into laughter soon after. Although he wished desperately to grab David, tie him up, and then pry in his head to check what he knows. After which, advancing wouldn't be a problem for him anymore. He calmed himself instantly. It's best to take things very slowly. If he forcefully grabbed David now that he had been registered to the Institute, he would be in huge trouble. Although the Institute permits killing between cadets, they would investigate the cause of death to the latest details without anything going amiss. Also, ridging the results of the investigation is also an impossibility, as different people from different departments would be there to investigate personally and give their personal reports accordingly before the council will come into a conclusion. So, once a student was reported missing, the matter would be thoroughly investigated. Finding the cadet was just a matter of 5 hours of searching, since any random insect, bees, ants, rats, animals basically could actually be a cyborgenic life form. Cyborgenic life forms can be basically defined as a life form that has been genetically engineered from the moments their parents were pregnant of them to serve different purposes. For example, the eggs of a butterfly could be altered with a specific type of technique and then genetically modified to provide audio and video signals for surveillance purpose. Or could be implanted with a nanocam and a nanocircuit to merge with the life forms as it grows. So basically, it's impossible to escape from any crime in the whole huge island owned by the Institute, except if one owned a piece of gadgets. Due to these reasons, Mu-chan dares not to be audacious. He has to act carefully and cautiously. So approaching David is also a no-no, as that plan itself is a bad one. It would raise suspicions and speculations. Some impossibly stupid people might actually speculate that he was having an affair with a cadet. There are a lot of people fighting and scheming for his current position to the extent that they would come up with various forms of speculations just to sully his name and get rid of him for good, which Mu-chan would very much like to avoid. So the only option is to... Thinking of this, Mu-chan's maniac laughter resounded through his office, faint vibrations buzzing behind him, almost summoning his phantomic beast due to lose of control. He quickly got himself under control, regaining his countenance. He called for one of his subordinates. Putting down the barrier towards his office, Elder Ivor opened the door to his office and walked into the office with steady steps. Putting down the barrier towards his office, Mu-chan watched as Elder Ivor walked into the office with steady steps. "You called me," Elder Ivor said as a statement. But inwardly, he was really slightly nervous. Ever since he found out that the secret he thought was still a secret was actually not a secret and had been secretly known amongst the other elders, keeping it a secret from him. It made him a little angry, but there was nothing he could do about that, as the information had already been leaked and he would have to suffer the consequences sooner or later. The fact that he had slightly more than 100 teenagers of his clansmen here was a slightly grave offense which is needed to be punished by the Institute, since he had stolen the opportunity of other candidates and given them to his clansmen instead. Although he knew this day would come, but he didn't know it would come this soon. It was his judgment day. His body might seem unshakable, while voice was clear and full of strength. But if one could pay attention to him and fully concentrate on his voice and body, one would notice a slight tremble in his tone. He was a lot nervous than he showed. "I don't appreciate you wasting my time, so you should clearly know what you are here for," Mu-chan stated straightforwardly in a strict tone, not caring at all that the person he was speaking to was clearly more than 20 years older than him, as Elder Ivor was in his early 50s, but the strength he gave off was still as young and healthy as a teenager. Wanting to open his mouth to reply in a negative manner, he instantly saw Mu-chan's stern expression hardened, making him lose the words just at the tip of his mouth. He changed his words. Yes, I do, leader. Ivor's voice clearly trembled slightly, although trying to hold strong. That's good. We'll give you the benefit of the doubt. What do you think your punishment should be? Should I follow the protocols according to the Institute and remove you from your current position? Mu Chen's thick eyebrow rose in a questioning manner. Elder Ivor was happy, though, because Mu Chen didn't directly punish him yet and only asked, which implies that he still has some sort of hope or opportunity left. Grasping it would ensure his continuous stay in the Institute. What must I do to redeem myself, sir? Elder Ivor was smart and did not bother beating around the bush also. He asked in a hopeful tone, since Mu Chun hadn't directly dished out punishments. It means that there was hope for him. That's why I love talking with smart people. Seems like you are smart. Mu Chen nodded his head in acknowledgement. Thanks for your compliments, sir. Elder Ivor offered a slight bow with a tilt of his head. Although I ought to punish you according to the Institute's rules, but since I have something for you to do, Mu Chan smiled while he kept talking softly to Elder Ivor with him, occasionally nodding his head. Seemingly satisfied, he sent Elder Ivor away, putting up the force field. Meanwhile, at David's place, the sky cruiser landed a few meters in front of them. Coming out of the sky cruiser was a very beautiful lady. Black hair, full pink lips, curvy body, soft ebony skin-tight body. Both David and Nihia gazes were stuck on her swiftly, their throats bubbling up and down as they swallowed their saliva down their lungs, staring at this seductress. But both people, David and Nihia, reacted with different reasons entirely. One out of desire and the other out of fear. Phillida came out of the cruiser, instantly revealing the task she had accepted. The people she had been assigned to pick. She had bought the sky cruiser after amassing a huge amount of gyno points from her few hundred clansmates. Then she had registered herself in the sky cruiser for public transport. This was one of the best ways to gain more gyno points, and in a few weeks of working, she would have gained the amount used to buy the sky cruiser. Of course, she could have assigned one of her subordinates to drive the sky cruiser, but she insisted on doing it herself in order to increase her experience in maneuvering a sky cruiser, since she would need it on the long run. She was immediately surprised when she saw the one before her, her eyes flashing an unusual glow when her gaze fell onto David. The moment her eye flashed with a sinister glow, David's body instantly reacted. His eyelids drooped as if he was sleeping, leaving a slight space for him to see. His body instantly turned lazy, as if nothing in the world could ever awakening him. Not sure if he was even thinking. At first glance, one would think he was just being lazy or was really sleepy. But he was actually at his peak performance right now, ready to swiftly respond to any threats available. As David felt his body undergo such changes, he wasn't at all surprised. It had happened quite a few number of times. It happened back at the orientation hall, when Mu Chun released his phantomic beast. But he really wasn't paying attention to it, because his attention was focused on something else. The beast. It had happened a few times while he was walking around the Institute. He had determined that it only occurred whenever he was in a powerhouse's field of vision or immediate surroundings. Basically, whenever anyone stronger than him looked at him with scrutiny or just passed by him, he would always feel this way. And now that he had the opportunity of seeing a strong person up close, it was a lot surprising, as it was a fellow student who made him feel this way, and a female at that. He figured out in that instant she was not to be messed with. Not giving David enough time to respond, the girl spoke up at them. 2 gyno points. Non-negotiable. Phillida's sweet voice, like the chimes of bells in a Christmas morning, rang out through their ears, mesmerizing Nihia more and more. Before David could furiously shout out daylight robbery, Nihia was apparently faster than he was. With a slight gulp in his throat, he spoke. Deal. Responding with a gorgeous smile, sending Nihia to a daze again. Hop in then. Phillida replied as she swayed her hips back to the vehicle. Nihia quickly entered. David froze in front of the mechanism with hesitation visible in his eyes. After a few moments, he walked into the sky cruiser, lazily yawning from time to time. But his eyes were actually scanning Phillida's every movements to the smallest details. He couldn't help but wonder how a girl like that could be powerful as to be a threat to him. It was terrifying. Turning back, Phillida turned back as if to remember something. Have we met before? I seem to know you from somewhere. Her questioning gaze towards David. Since David was at his peak in this moment, he easily recalled where he heard that voice from. Although he could just deny having met her before, but that would just complicate things more and more since she apparently didn't get the message the last time. Sure, you told me something like interesting, although you aren't the first I've ever thought of it. You also wouldn't be the last, something like that. David replied, casually recalling the words she had said, stretching his body a bit. As if just remembering, Phillida nodded her head, reminiscing. Oh yeah, you are that aerial apartment guy. She smiled. Phillida's smile bloomed beautiful as she introduced herself. I'm Phillida, and you guys are? Nihia. My name is Nihia, and that guy is called David. It's our pleasure meeting you. Nihia stuttered for a moment, and then gradually turned a bit eloquent at the end. Placing her hands over her mouth, Phillida giggled softly. Oh my, what had some names? We should get going since the others are getting quite impatient. Phillida smiled as she glanced at both boys. Her eyes stayed on David, who looked as though he was about to sleep, yawning from time to time. The chill in her eyes increased, and she almost lost control of her emotions. It's not the time for that yet. She muttered to herself, and with her signature smile, she swayed her hips as she entered into the cruiser. David and Nihia followed in tow. After walking through the hatchway, they appeared in a long row of seats. There were other people already seated in various parts of the seats. All right, I shall get going. You guys should pick any seat you want. I will see you boys later. Her green, attractive eyes glanced at them. With that, she flipped her hair and left to the control center of the sky cruiser. Nihia appeared to daydream even after they had taken their seats. David had no intention of interrupting such weird but interesting moments. He was glad to continue watching the myriad display showing on Nihia's face, but he was sure if Phillida knew what was currently brewing in this guy's mind, although he couldn't tell just how powerful the girl was, since he had no idea how the power system in this world works. But he was sure of a single thing. If Phillida knew what was going on in Nihia's mind, she might actually just DA with him without a single bone left to touch. Hey, snap out of it. David interrupted by slapping the Nihia's face lightly. Ow, what was that for? Holding his face while glaring at David. You best tone it down. Whatever you were thinking, it might just lead to your death. David snorted and he warned. Startled, Nihia paused and then snickered as he turned away, muttering, seems like I've been underestimated. Tell me about how you called the sky cruiser without using your tag. David asked, resting his back on the soft seat. It was even more comfortable than those he had tried on Earth. They were clearly made out of a different material. A strong beast for maybe. David guessed. And why would I do that? Since you wouldn't bother reading the student's guide to the end, you just keep bothering me with questions. I think I need to charge you for that. Nihia replied seriously. His mind kept telling him that he forgot something, but he ignored it. While holding David's gaze, David's eyebrow rose a little. He was a little bit surprised about the fact that Nihia suddenly grew some balls at this moment. Infatuation makes you bolder. David thought to himself, not wishing to blow things out of proportion since Nihia wasn't really in his right state of mind. I will read the book finish later, all right? But can you please kindly tell me how you called the cruiser without doing anything? Please. Nihia shook his softly as thigh, getting rid of the thoughts in his head. Beefer, he responded. The reason I could call the cruiser without actually performing a single action was because I upgraded my personal interface to the second level, which grants one the opportunity to speak freely to the AI by speaking using your brainwaves alone. Nihia answered David's questions directly. Oh, David was enlightened. Now he knew the reason, but at the same time he was puzzled too. He spoke with his AI using his mind already without doing any upgrading. Was he special? It seems the Institute already recognized his talents and knows how precious he is. David thought as his narcissistic side began to show. But talented students with 3 stars talents have their AI directly upgraded by 2 levels the moment they are registered by the Institute. They are treated with much more care than those with 1 star or 2 star talents. Oh, so that's why. David thought. He was already a 3-star. He couldn't imagine what would have happened if he had registered as a 5-star individual. His treatment would certainly be better than this. To upgrade one's personal interface to the second level, one would need 10 gyno points to perform such tasks. From a second level to the third level requires 100 gyno points. Requires 1,000 gyno points from the third level to fourth level. And from fifth to the sixth level, it requires 10,000 gyno points for upgrading, making it very expensive to upgrade. Most students actually only upgrade theirs to the third level since the Institute would take back what was theirs, the AI. After the students graduates from the Institute takes back the AI. It was a waste of precious gyno points to upgrade something that wasn't going to be yours forever. So most students opt not to upgrade at all or upgrade to the third level as their limits. That's to say, only talented students with 3 stars talents and above would get their AIs upgraded. 3 stars talented individuals would get just a single upgrade. 4 stars would get 2 upgrades, while the legendary 5 stars talented individuals, which is as rare as a phoenix feather or a Chelan horn, would directly get theirs upgraded to the 6th level with immediate effect. Although the 6th level upgrade isn't the highest, it has a high enough authority to match some instructors if the Institute. The perks of a 5-star talented student are numerous beyond words. David should have been one. Let's just say he gave up on the opportunity due to his forgetful nature for some other reason entirely. The surroundings shook. The familiar seductive voice rang out from the sky cruiser. "Sit tight, we are taking off now." The sky cruiser was lifted up the ground slowly by the thrusters at its sides. Whoosh! The sky cruiser immediately accelerated at an incredible speed, causing some of the passengers on it who weren't prepared for it, since it was their first time on the sky cruiser. And those people are David and Nihia. They were instantly pushed backwards. David's situation was all right, since he swiftly grabbed onto the handle of the seat he was sitting on. But Nihia's situation was a lot worse, as he thrusted backward, almost tumbling backwards like a gymnast. His legs were almost above his head. Lucky for him, they were at the back of the cruiser, and although he was a bit embarrassed, it was nothing much since there was no one watching him. Well, technically, no stranger was watching him. Glancing sideways, he noticed David's mouth twitching from time to time, his eyelids also shaking. Nihia sighed. "Just laugh if you want to. No need to force yourself." David's lips twitched faster, but he ultimately didn't laugh. Glancing at the abnormally silent Nihia from time to time, he asked, "You okay?" "Yeah, I'm all right," Nihia replied, but he was still as gloomy as he was. He kept thinking in his head, what if Philida was watching him right then? He would have embarrassed himself in front of her just because he doesn't know anything about the sky cruiser. He made up his mind right then. His second goal right now is to buy his own personal sky cruiser. Sitting quietly on the seat of the sky cruiser, David looked sideways since he was sitting very close to the window. He could see as they soared into the skies in a seemingly predetermined route. He also noticed that although the sky cruisers were moving fast and also about to bump into each other, they always magically avoid each other in the nick of time, brushing past each other in a smooth fashion, making one sigh in admiration at such precise control over the machines. Although David instinctively doesn't really like Philida, he had to admit, though, she was really good at controlling the sky cruiser, an ability worth being jealous over. And whilst he hadn't been to the control center of the sky cruiser, he could only imagine how hard it was going to be driving the vehicle. David turned his head back, facing Nihia. As he was about to ask him something, he suddenly felt the sky cruiser decelerating before coming to a stop, and then a light thump was heard as the sky cruiser landed softly on the ground. Checking over the windows, the sky cruiser had come to a stop. Seems like we got in there. That was fast." David mulled over in his head. The hatch opened, spilling out crowds of teenagers. Amongst them, David and Nihia came out last. Yawning, David looked around curiously with his droopy eyes, while Nihia's eyes shone with both curiosity and expectation. Seems like he was really enthusiastic about the combat lessons, which David was really sure it wasn't something to be happy about. The flying vehicle landed at the edge of an open field. The field was almost as large as a football field. In the middle of the field, there are already students there standing in a single file and also according to their heights. "See you later." Nihia left in a hurry in a bid to join them. A bit surprised, he watched as Nihia left like a hurricane to find his position in the line. David smiled a bit at the enthusiastic Nihia before he shrugged, walking in large strides towards his position on the line according to his height, which was located almost at the middle of the line. David stood there lazily for a few seconds. Soon after, he got really impatient since the lecturer isn't there yet. The rest of the students waited patiently for the appearance of their teacher without any complaints like they were already used to it. Seeing as the other students who went for the previous lessons were quiet, the students who were attending the lesson for the first time also kept quiet. Well, with the exception of David. As David frowned and was about to ask someone what was going in, a tiny emerged far off the sky. Rapidly closing in on the students, the dot grew from its previous tiny frame to a much larger one since it was already close enough to be seen by the students. The figure of a slick-looking sky cruiser gradually emerged rapidly. The cruiser was completely pink in color, shining with a metallic shine on it, looking both badass and cute, with two omni thrusters at both sides, spewing out waterfalls of combustible energy. The students, when it got to the edge of the field, it only slowed down a little bit, but its speed was still considered quite fast. As he saw the sky cruiser speeding towards them, having no thoughts of slowing down, David's eyebrows rose in surprise. Looking at his fellow students having no thoughts of running for their lives or something. Instead, their eyes shone in admiration and in expectation as though they about to watch something really interesting. Since they didn't run, I also wouldn't run. Let's see what would happen, David thought as he gritted his teeth. In that instant, as the sky cruiser was about to pass over the student's head, something immediately dropped down from the already open hatch of the flying vehicle. The object immediately closing in on them at a terrifying speed due to its inertia and gravity. That object was a woman. Cries of shock immediately rang out from the group of students, although it came from students who were attending the class for the first time since they had been admitted into the institution. It was their first time seeing someone jumping down from an altitude of more than 30 meters high. Even if one had superhuman strength, it's no different from seeking one's death. As David recognized the object as a woman, his eyes immediately opened wide in astonishment. Thereafter, his lips curled up in a sadistic smile. Laughing in his mind, he courting death. Adopting a pose of one who wants to watch a good show. He gazed in expectation at the woman who was descending just like a meteor. The lady's descent didn't slow down at all. In fact, she changed her position, turning her head upside down with her face towards the ground, increasing her already terrifying downwards momentum. And as if she was still dissatisfied with her speed, she placed her hands straight by her sides, her blonde hair flapping behind her. Whoosh! Her body dived straight towards the ground, slicing apart the air like a knife to soft cheese with terrifying speed. As her body was about to hit the ground, she immediately performed a front flip, flipping her body and changing her upside-down posture to the normal standing posture, spreading her feet apart to a type of horse stance with one hand forward. Bang! The students immediately felt the impact as tremors surged through the ground. Dust and grass immediately rose up, flying everywhere, covering the whole area. Cries of fear immediately rang out from the new students. Although the ones who attended her classes in the past 2 days had experienced it before, they still couldn't hold in their disbelief as they stared at the figure in the middle of the rising dust. David's facial expression was exceptionally priceless as he was filled with incredulity. It was something he wouldn't have believed would happen even if he dreamed about it. It was impossible, both scientifically and logically. He was expecting to see her in pieces at least, but he couldn't have expected that she was totally fine even after jumping about 30 meters from a flying vehicle. Staring forwards in disbelief, David watched as the dust, grass, and sand cleared up, exposing the figure within the 5 meters wide crater. It was a lady in her late 20s with blonde hair, 5 feet 7 inches tall, with a slim figure passable amount of breast almost poking out her shirt, wearing a tight but long trousers, pink lips, beautiful face that is currently twisted into one of savagery, which made guys think at least 3 times before asking out. The woman was still in her bent position, but beneath her legs, a 5-meter hole had been created. The lady raised her head, keeping her legs together, completely expressionless. She added a slight tension to her legs. With a swish, she jumped out of the hole she had created. "I'm Ella, but you shall address me as instructor from now till the end of your year." This would be the third and the last time I would mention something like this to you batch of students, so I won't repeat myself for those who ain't here yet. That would be your job to keep, Arella said in the midst of tying up her loose hair into a ponytail. Glancing at the group of students whose faces still held expressions of incredulity, disbelief, and in awe. They're still kids after all, she thought while trying to resist the tiny smile that had managed to creep onto her small lips. Letting down her hands from her hair, placing them on her hips, her face turning serious swiftly. "I have taught those who came earlier in the last 2 days. I won't repeat those topics I have touched upon anymore. And if you're interested, just ask around from the ones who came for the past 2 days, or you could do whatever you want. I don't really care." Flipping her hand, showing that she really cared if they asked around or not. Placing her hands behind her back, taking large strides while walking from the starting line of the assembled students to the end, while making sure to maintain eye with each and every one of them, as if trying to intimidate them. When she got to David's position, David wasn't at all intimidated by her. Instead, he stared at her as if he was observing a very rare specimen. His slightly droopy eyes together with that weird gaze of his immediately caught the attention of the instructor. "What sort of look is that?" Instructor Ella took a second glance at the student. She made a mental note to keep an eye for this student of hers, because his face practically screams lazy. "Now, who can truly tell me, why was the REB stronger than we were some years back?" Instructor Ella asked. A couple of students raised up their hands in a bid to answer the question. Most of them were the new students who just attended her class for lecture today. The ones who had attended her lectures, though, were oddly silent. Their faces having a faint grace of mockery, they tried really hard, attempting to hide from their expressions. Not really noticeable on hindsight, but although David's attention was on the freak of a lady, he was still sober enough to notice the slight smirk shown on some of the students who attended her first class faces, making him both totally confused and suspicious. Looking at the over-enthusiastic group of students in front of her that are willing to give her an answer to the question, Instructor Ella chuckled before saying, "Oh, I forgot to tell you all that. Your personal AI won't work here. All the instructors in the Institute are given special access to freeze the student's personal AI." A slight smirk gradually emerged from Instructor Ella's normally stoic face, softening her stern facial expressions. Although she might or might not have forgotten to tell them that she could only freeze it during lectures. When the students heard her words, some of them had their faces of excitement instantly frozen, then from excitement into one of confusion. Few of the students were planning to cheat with the help of the personal AI offered to them by the Institute, but with the words spoken by the instructor, it was all useless. David's eyebrows furrowed into a frown as he tapped at his tag 3 times to call forth his holographic image, but he saw nothing. This is bad. No one could record or even note some things down to the system. What are they trying to do? Doing that would increase the rate at which student failed during the final examination. Squinting his eyes, David thought things through, giving him a huge headache. Suddenly, his face smoothened into a relaxed expression. "It's not really my problem. Sigh, just thinking of it gave me a headache. TSK, too troublesome trying to think." The students, still stunned about the new information, were gradually coming to their senses. Although Ella had dropped the news multiple times to different batches of the new students that were admitted into the Institute, she had long ago gotten used to their stunned expression, and it's getting damn tiring all the time. She was already a little sick of it. The numbers of hands being raised up in an attempt to answer the question was immediately reduced into a minuscule amount of student willing to answer the questions. "Now that we have gotten that out of the way, you there, yes you." The one with the droopy eyes. Instructor Ella pointed towards the one of the students one front of her. David's droopy eyes immediately widened as he realized Instructor Ella was pointing her finger towards him. He surprised at first, Then the expression of surprise soon morphed into that of confusion. He was really confused and actually not faking it. He wanted to roar out towards the teacher that he didn't even raise his hands. His the hell did she still take notice of him, since there were at least 50 students currently standing in line with him? There was not really worthy of taking notes on him. While he was quite a bit handsome, but amidst the group of students standing in line with him, he wasn't even worth being graded in the top 20. And the most important and frustrating part of these is that he didn't even raise his hands. How did he still get the attention of the instructor? David was screaming in his heart, but he dared not day the least bit of his thoughts outside. It was unknown when it started, but his mind already had trace of fear within his heart ever since her performance of her Moor of entry. If that tiny leg that created a few meters hole in the field on plain solid ground, one could imagine if that leg's landed on someone else. So, he made up his mind not to mess with this lady at all. Squinting his eyes slightly, David pondered for a few moments before giving instructor Ella an answer. I have absolutely no answer to that question. Instructor. David answered truthfully. The instructor stared at David for a few seconds before turning her gaze away from him. Anyone else wants to give a try? Instructor Ella said, while looking at her other students. Hello, Instructor Ella. I'm Philida. A very sweet voice chimed in softly, grabbing most of the people's attention. David immediately recognized that voice, although the way the voice sounds was as little different than it did before, making the ever-lazy David wants to look over to her. Lazily snapping his head in the direction of the voice, David's eyebrows rose slightly. She is a bit different than when I met her just slightly over 10 minutes ago. When David met her at the entrance of her Sky Cruiser, she was a little seductive and also a bit feisty. But now, she looks just like the innocent neighbor next door, hence causing his raised eyebrows. Hold up for a minute. Instructor Ella raised her hands to stop the innocent-looking girl from continuing with her words, folding her hands, making those melons about to pop out of their pockets more enticing, drawing a light gasp from most of the male students, including David. Being physically lazy doesn't affect his sexual desires. He could tell by the swelling of his third leg rising with every beat his heart made. Gulping down mouthfuls of saliva, David recovered in time to listen to her next sentence. Kids, let me get things straight with you all. I really do not care for your names or anything information related to you or about you, Arella said, while also not forgetting to send an indifferent gaze towards the students. When David heard her words, he didn't really care about it. He honestly didn't care about it. But then he glanced towards Philida, seemingly about to gloat in the face of her misfortune. Although he didn't really give a F***ck about her, he would be quite happy to see her fail. When David turned his gaze towards her, he saw that although her facial expression easily said she was angry, and although David's body language looked like he doesn't easily notice things happening around him, mainly his slightly droopy eyes, but they were always sharp and nothing could wax his eyes, unless he lets them, especially when they're a strong being in his immediate surroundings. Like, for example, the instructor who could threaten his life. She could do him in like she's killing chickens. When there are powerful beings in his surroundings, his eyelids would drop down, covering his eyes. His eyelashes would protect his eyes from being observed by the opponent. His body would relax a lot, and from another's perspective, it would look like he was just being lazy. But his muscles would be very tense, ready to respond to any threat in the fastest way possible. And right now, he could feel the threats coming from his front, his left and right side simultaneously. The one coming from the left, he could feel that there were two other people aside for Philida. The threat from his left side is even a little bit bigger than that of Philida, which means apart from Philida, there are other students amongst the batch of students who had been highly trained by their families. He keenly noticed that although her facial expression is one of embarrassment, which made the eyes of the other boys who saw them want to hug her and protect her from bad guys, especially Nihia, who is pretty much glaring at the instructor with squinted eyes. Philida's eyes were still as a lake without any ripples. Thinking for a bit, David made a speculation. Maybe she doesn't care what the instructor thought of her. But, from what I've noticed from her so far, she wouldn't do something like that. Unless she knows exactly what the instructor would say, and was waiting for that. What would she gain, though? Oh, since the instructor doesn't want to know their names, the only person's name she knows now is Phillida. What a scheming little girl. David's eyes twitched as he thought. If the instructor wishes to choose a person from the class, or for some other matters entirely, Phillida's name might just pop in her mind. Although I don't care about your names, what I do care about is your talent in the art of combat. If it's good, I would be very thrilled to know your name. But if it's mediocre, Instructor Ayala paused for a moment, staring piercingly at the students. Well, if we meet outside combat lessons, let's just say we never knew each other. Strangers to each other. Don't be bothered to greet me, cause I won't bother answering you. Got it? The instructor said in a stern voice. Hey, blue-blonde guy, answer the question. She motioned to a boy with blonde hair and blue eyes who had risen hand up earlier to answer a question, while also glancing at Phillida. Although the girl looks like an innocent girl, she's actually pretty good at scheming. Too bad she can't fool me with just that. Not letting her continue would be her punishment. Adela snorted as she thought, preparing to listen to the blue-blonde boy speak. Yes, instructor. The boy replied in a calm tone that exuded his confidence and pride. The rapidly evolved beasts are strong because of their ability to absorb the mutagen in the air, which increases their combat prowess the faster and longer they could absorb the mutagen. The blue-blonde boy finished his sentence while smiling. Instructor Ella rolled her eyes while sighing. This dumb boy. Ignoring him completely, she spoke out to them. Who else can answer the question? I mean correctly this time, she asked. No one replied, because most of them would give the same answer as blue-blonde boy, seeing as Phillida was the only one whose hands were up. All right, speak up, girlie. Out of options, Instructor Ella chose Phillida. Phillida's eyes twitched. Although she was a smart person, she was an incredibly proud person, especially her. And there is always limit to what a person like her was willing to take before reaching her berserk mode. Hers is a very small height. First, you ignored me, and now, when you have no choice but to give me attention, you choose to call me girlie? Phillida thought to herself as she was getting increasingly annoyed. In her clan, although she wasn't well known by the younger generation, that was because most of the younger generation didn't have the authority or privilege to encounter her, to talk less of having any knowledge about her. She had been under the tutelage of their clan's master, and the clan elders spared no efforts in teaching her. Only the upper echelons of the clan had known about her. She had received praises from the head of the family, saying she was the most talented individual the clan had seen since the last 200 years. Although she hadn't been given the transplant yet, her talent in various martial arts is to be considered terrifying. She could quickly grasp any techniques taught to her in 2 years or 3 years. An ordinary person could never train such techniques past the glimpse stage without soaking in bath water containing 1/10 of a drop of a serum while training with such techniques. It is very important to use only 1/10 of a drop of the serum before practicing such techniques. Using more than 1/10 of a drop could prove to be harmful on a long-term basis. Otherwise, it could result in an abnormal mutation to the body, causing unknown and unwanted changes to the body. Using the serum without such techniques is equivalent to courting death. Such techniques helps distribute the radiation and mutagenic energy to the proper and appropriate parts of the body without causing any serious damage or any huge changes to the body. Using serum would undoubtedly cause a side effect, but although such techniques doesn't reduce the side effect, instead, it helps in guiding the side effect, turning into a positive effect. For example, the mutation which might have caused one's head to expand like a balloon could be guided by such techniques to increase the bust of one's breasts or the one's buttocks instead, increasing a female's sexiness by a huge amount. The radiation from a drop of serum could kill a fully grown elephant in a single second without the slightest bit of struggle. Those techniques aren't any ordinary techniques. They had a slight trace of the profound secrets of phasers. An ordinary person would spend his or her entire childhood to train such techniques to perfection. But she spent at most 2 to 3 years to train such techniques to perfection, which was a testimony to her terrifying talent in combat techniques. Taking a deep breath, Phillida decided to ignore the woman. She had been informed about the behavior and characteristics of each and every one of the instructor in the institute, and due to her intelligent person, opened her mouth to answer the instructor Ella's had asked previously. The reasons our EBs were stronger than we were back then was because of the differences in combat techniques, secret arts, and also the differences between equipments and killing weapons. Phillida answered as she finished her sentence with the sweetest smile she could muster. Instructor Ella pondered when she heard Phillida's words. Although that wasn't how I would put it, but you have basically grasped the base of things I wanted to say. Instructor Ella said as she glanced at Phillida for a second, and then with a slight nod of her head, she flipped her gaze to the rest of the students. If you have read the students' guidelines, you would know that there are 100 points to be gained out the semester. 20 points worth of attendance, 20 points for the monthly assessments, and the last, but not the least, 50 points for the final examinations. Some of the students are about the point distribution scheme, but some of the other students' expression turned slightly weird. Some were showing a nervous expression, some of their expression were ugly, and some of their expression were just plain being pretentious upon hearing the words of the instructor, since some of them haven't read the guidelines yet. Nihia glanced sideways toward his left side, where David was located with his expression almost saying, "You are also among them," but David's expression was completely plain as if he had done nothing wrong. Meanwhile, he was among those who had not read their manuals yet. Normally, I would have waited a week to really start the combat lessons in the past, since that has always been the rules of the Institute. We wait a week for all the students to heal from the myalgia, but it's been changed due to lack of helping staffs in the Institute. Instructor Ella continued with her words. The result of the report regarding lack of workers in the Institute being taken to tables of the main Institute is to reduce the amount of students that passes the cutoff mark of 100 points. The least amount of points needed to pass the semester was originally 40 points, but now it had been increased to a glaring amount of 60 points to pass the semester, or one would be reduced to a mere worker whose job is to serve both the institutes and the students every which way they can. Basically, for a student to pass a semester, they have to score at least 40 points to be considered passed to the next semester. But it has been changed by the Institute due to the lack of workers. And to create new batch of workers least amount of trouble, they had to choose from the untalented students, since picking them outside the Institute was just practically inviting a wolf to one's house. There are also other institutes or schools who wishes to plant their spies into the Institute so. And although not choosing from outside the Institute also had its disadvantages, its pros include reducing the amount of spies being planted into the Institute, reducing and containing them. But the con is that the spies are very well hidden, even among the teachers and students, without them personally exposing themselves. It is very hard to expose them, since they were all very well trained by the Institute, academy, or organization each or them work for. Although the opportunity given to the students who had failed to pass the final exams are given one chance to repeat the semester still stands, but after that, their statuses would be reduced to a lowly, odd job workers of the Institute. Now, to the main event, Ella's expressionless face turned devious with a slightly wicked smirk in her lips as it tilted up. Her eyes turned incredibly sinister. Now, to the main event, Ella's expressionless face turned devious with a slightly wicked smirk in her lips as it tilted up. Her eyes turned incredibly sinister in the next second. The atmospheric pressure surrounding instructor Ella suddenly started rising in an increasingly steady manner, as her aura rose simultaneously with it. Woo, woo, woo. The air in the field stirred up slightly as they surrounded her sexy figure, waving her blonde hair around. Like a cyclone, her figure clearly visible through the dust surrounding her, as if she was the eye of a small tornado. Her eyes turned piercingly sharp in an instant, becoming slightly intimidating as if it could see through metal alloys, as though it was transparent. Upon seeing this, David's body instantly became lax as his eyes dropped further, his long eyelashes covering the entirety of his eyes, making them indiscernible by those who wishes to gaze upon them. But he could clearly see through his eyelashes as if they were completely transparent. His head bent slightly, with his hair covering his face. David wasn't a bit startled by his bodily reaction, nor was he surprised at it. With his experience so far, he had noticed that his body reacted in this weird way if he was facing a dangerous situation or someone who could clearly threaten his life. He calmly observed the situation, with his eyes which was clearly shining with expectation, clearly a little bit excited and also a lot cautious, as if he knew what was coming. He wasn't the only one, though. A lot more people also readied themselves for combat, especially Phillida, whose face was relaxed. Clearly, she had been informed of what would happen, and judging by the relaxed and slightly serious looks of a few students, they had also knew what was coming. But the rest of the students clearly shone panicked expressions on their faces. Some managed to forcibly calm themselves down, but while some, mostly the young girls, were on the verge of screaming out bloody murder. As the instructor gazed upon the myriad of rich expressions on the faces of her students, her evil smile grew more exponentially. She still had never gotten bored of this part of her lessons new students had to pass through during the combat lessons. Raising her left foot up slightly, she abruptly stomped her foot forcefully on the field. Boom! The ground beneath her crumbled as the sexy instructor's body was catapulted towards the air like a cannon shot out. Almost 15 meters her body seemed to hover slightly in the air. She looked just like a goddess who had descended from the heavens, as she seemingly floated in the air, with her hair flapping happily all over the place. Looking down on her students, her smirk grew more prominent, turning into a smile, making her appear very beautiful, a whole lot different from her previously stern expression. Suddenly, a metallic white thing with a schwa grew out from her left forearm, turning into a sharp bone blade more than a meter long. The blade gave off an invincible aura, as if it could tear apart the air itself. The instant David caught sight of the bone blade that seemingly grew out of the woman's hand, horror could be seen inside his hidden eyes, and without notice, he dove head first backwards. The corner of his eyes caught sight of a few people who had jumped way more faster and longer than he did. Phillida included. She was at the forefront in the air. Instructor Ella's smile turned sinister, and her eyes shone with a crazy glow, and with a low shout, "Ha!" she swiftly slashed diagonally towards the students below. Horror grew in the expression of the students below. Their awe turned into fear as they intended to scatter. Schwa! She slashed out, and although the blade wasn't long enough to reach the ground, the air instantly condensed as a sharp but transparent blade emerged from the blade, growing into an almost 20-meter-long arc slicing towards the students at an inconceivable speed. Rolling to his feet, David's spine suddenly tingled. He immediately realized he wasn't out of danger yet. Turning his head, he saw the transparent sharp arc of blade cutting the air apart, coming toward him and the others. It was already 5 meters from him and the other students. Expressionless, David instantly stomped his foot to the ground, forcibly changing his momentum. His waist twisted immediately towards his left. Then his body acted like an elastic as his tendons, muscles, and spine twanged like a bowstring being plucked, and with the rebounding force, his body performed a 360 toward his right side with amazing speed, a feat that was previously impossible by anyone. Without showing his surprise, not that he was even aware of the impossibility of the matter, even if he was aware, he wouldn't care right now, because he was well aware that his life was in danger right now. Distracting himself right now was basically promoting suicide. The transparent arc was already almost a meter away from him, closing the distance between them with incredulous speed. Not enough time to gather his strength. He instantly punched towards the blade arc with his 2 fists. Similarly, different kinds of actions were also taking place. The blue-eyed blonde guy actions were exceptionally swift. He stomped both his foot to the ground then. A weird vibration could be seen vibrating in a weird frequency, starting from his thigh. Afterwards, it swiftly grew like millions of crawling ants to his hands, then into his thumbs, which he held between his fists. One could see his thumb between his finger that were clenching to form a fist. The thumb was bright red, as if it was about to explode onto too much blood. Making a creaking sound afterwards, he immediately punched it toward the arc blade. Phillida's action was a little more relaxed, but she still had a serious expression on her face, because she had leaped backwards hoping to escape the blade arc. But feeling the danger behind her, She deduced that it was impossible to escape. One would think she should be either nervous or panicking right now, but she did neither. With her back facing the arc blade, she wiped her hands backwards, with her index finger pointing outwards, in which the color of her index finger was tinged with a hue of the color blue. Many students also attacked with their most powerful attack they could muster. Finger attacks, fist, kicks, all sort of attacks were immediately performed. Their attacks immediately connected to the arc blade. Many students also attacked with their most powerful attack they could muster. Finger attacks, fist, kicks, all sort of attacks were immediately performed. Their attacks immediately connected to the large transparent arc blade. The expressions of the students immediately changed from their hardened expression to one of astonishment, confusion, bewilderment, and mostly fear. David's eyes opened wide as he glanced down at his lower body in astonishment and a slight bit of fear. The reason for that was because the moment the attacks of the students and the instructor was about to connect, their attacks met with nothing, only simple air. But the main reason for their fear was because the after effect of the instructor's attack, the transparent blade arc sliced through the bodies of the students, including David's. Philoda's expression also had a bit of fear in them, and although she knew the truth, seeing a blade pass through your body, who wouldn't feel a tinge of fear? David paused for 5 seconds before he tried moving his leg in fear. Taking a step forward, his legs moved. He softly touched his waist to check if it was still intact, seeing, as it wasn't separated out from his body, he visibly heaved a sigh of relief. Who? David looked towards his left and his right, scanning his classmates for anyone who had been either dismembered or any who had parts of their bodies being separated from them. But his expectations was bound to be a lost cause. Few of the students were still frozen in fear and shock, just like an extremely lifelike man-made statue. He also used the opportunity to glance towards Nihia, who had his arms crossed in front of him, his legs standing firmly in a horse stance, seemingly unshakable. He was also frozen in a battle stance. David raised his head back up towards the instructor, only to find out that the instructor, who was previously floating in midair, had at some point in time, was already on the ground, with a lazy expression on her face and a hint of satisfaction shining deep within her eyes. She had her arms folded in front of her, supporting her already voluptuous and succulent breast. Appearing even desirable, if not for the near-death encounter they had just experienced a few seconds ago, the male students would be spewing out blood from their noses without stop, but the young men's thoughts was already preoccupied with the thoughts of fear and death. Their brain couldn't spare the extra brain juice to process the stimulating sight in front of them. Instead of the looks of lust they were supposed to have due to almost popped-out breasts in front of them, they instead had looks of wariness and fear as they stared at the instructor in front of them like one would do to a demon. Instructor Arella sighed in satisfaction. Watching the changes of expression on each student's faces, it was quite satisfying to her. It has been more than 3 years since she had been assigned to the combat lessons teaching department. She had been teaching combat lessons in the institute for 3 years straight to new students of different batches. Her schedule for the first week of the students was to teach them theories of combat, basically the SH plus TS they had gotten themselves into, and also life and death together with some other miscellaneous subjects. After the first week of theories, debates, and some simple and basic questions and answers between her and her students, she would place them into an impossibly difficult scenario, wherein their latent potential would be awakened or more like forced out of them due to fear. It is like an initiation of a sort that every freshman has to undertake. Whosoever passes, great. But those who failed, no drastic actions like expulsion or the likes would taken. The freshmen would only change dorms and identity, simple, from a student's dorm to the labor house, and from a student of the institute to a temporary labor staff of the institute. People like that were given the grace of 2 weeks after they failed the initiation to become a spryer. If they failed, their statuses as a temporary labor staff of the institute would become permanent that instant. But if they passed, they would be allowed to join the institute as a student. Although the rules were there, those rules were one of the means the institute devised to keep the student from being lazy. But as time passed and the students of the institute grew plenty year after year, and their basic necessities were growing day by day with the low amount of labor staff and resources wasted on paying the labor workers that were assigned to cook, wash, etc. That particular rule was then known to be the one that provided free labor workers to the Institute without wasting any unnecessary resources. Also, students who failed the initiation were considered ones with low talents in combat, and having a weak heart or otherwise known as having a weak will. At first, there was barely any students who failed the initiation. At most 3 to 4 would fail. And if the new student's luck was good at that moment, out of all the freshmen who had been admitted into the institute, none of them may fail. And even if some failed, they would be given the opportunity to turn their failures into success due to the 2 weeks trail in the labor house, becoming a spryer in at most a week or slightly more than a week. But as the authorities in the institute realized that the numbers of students who become a permanent labor staff were almost non-existent. Although it was a good thing, it was also a bad situation as the staffs hired from outside the circle of the institute might include spies from foreign institutes. It was considered a great risk. After some meetings and considerations, the 2 weeks grace was reduced to only a week's time. And at that point, the students that failed initiation or rather test increased to almost a double of the amount that it used to be. This year, it was a lot worse and different from the past ones, and that is due to special reasons known only to the authorities of the Institute. She has been hinted, but it was more like she had been asked or rather tasked to perform the initiation as early as she could. But the final decision still lays in her hands. Well, at least that was what she was told. But as an extremely smart person, she only needed to be hinted once or twice before she would get the message very clear. One of the information about the initiation is that it is a very simple and practical step. The main reason for making the students undergo the test is because after going through the process called xenograft, which means transplanting a foreign organ to one's body, and in this case, an organ which is being extracted from an evolution beast, purified and prepared using different kinds of methods, techniques, and solutions by the Generic Association have been directly transplanted and into the bodies of the students at the very beginning after they had chosen to join the institution. The procedure includes 5 stages to a successful xenograft. The first process is to cut open the flesh, tissue, muscles, and finally the bones protecting the heart with precision. The second step is to pick a spot near or very close to the heart, then place the organ to transplanted very carefully next to the heart, where it would neither disturb nor cause any complications. The third step is a very complicated process, and with the slightest bit of mistake, the subject may very well end up with a cardiac arrest, or in a worst-case scenario, the subject may end up dead. That was why the evolutionary pod was created. One of the main functions of an evolutionary pod is the precision in the process of xenograft. The evolutionary pod was programmed to carry out the transplant with extreme accuracy with the help of an inbuilt tiny robotic arms installed with the tools needed for the operation. The only con about the evolutionary pod is that although the transplant carried by it is accurate, but it's always accurate by 87%, which although it was a lot, the rate of failure is 13%. Basically, out of 100 people, up to 87 people might succeed, while 13 people might fail. All who failed would die immediately without a doubt, either by the breakdown of their genes or explode into bloody mist considering the fact that go into a crazed madness. In some cases, though, some subject who survived through the process might evolve due to some special conditions, turning into mutated beings. The main reasons for that was because of the undulations of mutagenic energy emitted during the transplanting process. Those mutated beings had only one thing in mind: they craved for blood. Since the organs extracted from mutated beasts still had traces of their genetic characteristics within. Inasmuch as the Generic Association purified the beast's organs using different solutions, vials, etc., it still isn't enough to completely wipe out the traits of the beast's genetic characteristics. To completely wipe out the beast's genetic characteristics, the amount of resources needed to wipe out the stain of the beast's genetic characteristics completely hidden in the beast organs was enough to moderately purify the stains hidden in as much as 10 organs. The difference between the two purification process is that one purifies the stains organs, in which the cost for resources are expensive. Stains means mutated beast genetic characteristics, like the traits of when a wild lion meets human. Time for snack, lips smack. Those whose body were grafted with such organ are bound to be 3 stars talents at the very least in the Institute. The second purification process, moderately purify the organs, which is about 1/10 less expensive than a complete purification process, and is completely supported by the Institute due to the low cost of materials and services needed to perform the operation successfully. The only negative effect is that although the second purification process only purifies the organ, it is preferable because of its low costs and all. The dangers involved is also enormous if one was being considerate about the future. Every once in a while, there will be periods where one tends to lose control and when one's fighting capabilities would start to deteriorate from slow to fast. That was largely due to the fact that with time, the organ transplanted into the subject's body would start to reject the subject, which could cause inverse complications to the body. The solution to the problem that was arrived at by the cooperation of both the Generic Association and the government lead to the production of catalytic serums. The serum helps stabilize the body, increase the strength of the user. Then finally, it could help one further increase in strength when one had reached the limit of his or her current strength. Those specific organs have been named by the Generic Association as genomes. All in all, it all boils down to the luck of the subjects in order to succeed, because a few minute flaws in calculation might lead to death. Another cause for error is that, due to the undulation of both radiation and mutagenic energy, the processing unit would be forced to make unnecessary calculation, leading to incorrect timing, and then the operation would be considered a failure. It's completely impossible to calculate such accidents so as to contain them. The process involves the possession of godlike skill of precision and steady hand movement, which is why the operation is not being led by any human doctor. They were instead done with the help of the evolutionary pod. But a few doctors are also involved to ensure the operation goes smoothly without much failure. After the body parts protecting the heart have been shifted slightly, the pod would move its tiny set of robotic arms to cut apart a specific number of blood vessels, capillaries and veins in the heart, which is directly connected to the body to help pump blood into the system. After cutting them apart, the blood that was supposed to sprout out would be directly blocked by the evolutionary pod, which was exactly what it was programmed to perform perfectly. The subject is completely immersed into a type of mixed prepared liquid that looks slivery white in color, almost like mercury, leaving only his or her head in the air to breath. Also, the subject aren't allowed to take any painkiller shots, or it would directly lead to the increase in the rate of possible failure to 50% immediately. The genomes from the rapidly enhanced beings also has a few tube-like capillaries and blood vessels like a human's heart would. But instead of the tube-like capillaries and blood vessel to be still as one would expect, they would instead twitch in certain periods, reminding one of a really creepy scene. A weak and soft-hearted grown man might just be frightened to death if he saw the scene. The evolutionary pod would place the genomes sitting directly below the heart, at a spot where it would neither be moved nor shaken. If one were to jump up and down or perform intense activity, it won't even shake. Then, with amazing swiftness and accuracy, the plenty of robotic arms and tool started putting the tubular capillaries of the subject's heart, then directly joined them together, forming one tube. As soon as the blood at the tip of the heart vein touched the genomes, the tip of the genome's tube immediately shot up, latching onto the mouth of the heart vein as if they had received some kind stimulation. Clearly, blood is like a type of fuel to engine to the genomes, making them feel clearly excited. Worms-like tissues sprang forth from where the two tips touched, swiftly merging together like seeing a stitching needle and thread. It wasn't only one capillary, though. All of the capillaries from the subject's heart were latched onto by half of the genomes, while they were seemingly sewed together to form a perfect vein as tough it has been there since the beginning. The job of the robotic arms of the evolutionary pod was mainly to ensure that the right blood vessel and capillaries are placed in the right tubes of the genomes. Placing them in the wrong tubes would result in the wrong flow of blood and energy, indirectly leading to death due to wrong flow of blood. The veins and blood vessels were clearly very impatient, as they wanted to latch onto any blood vessels or capillaries they could find. But owing to the guidance of the evolutionary pod, it was directed to the right path and tubes. Only half of the tube-like capillaries remained from the genomes as they waved around the air quiet frantically. If the grown man who had died watching the previous scene now gets to see this scene, it wasn't unknown if her ghost would also die. But it was only half of the tubes from the genomes that were already connected to the complete veins from the heart. Half were still being prevented from connecting to other things or causing any damage. After the veins from the body was thoroughly saturated, the evolutionary pod would guide the tubes from the capillaries using its robotic arms with precise strength and agility, guided them towards the veins and the tubular capillaries. The same scene as the previous one happened. As soon as they touched blood, they latched onto the target that they were guided to and then joined together. All the tubes began latching to their targets simultaneously, just like a shark who had smelt blood. After they had been properly connected, the robotic arms of the evolutionary pod shifted the rib bones, tissue, and flesh back to their places. Then, with a few minutes of laser treatment, the opened-up flesh would be healed up, remaining just a small residential scar on the surface to show that one had undergone a life-threatening operation. Those are the steps a subject or student has to undergo for a xenograft. Now, back to the initiation. The main reason for the Institute to carry out such process is because the process of xenograft doesn't necessarily make one a superhuman yet. One has to under a seriously extremely strong stimulation, like fear, joy, at the peak before climaxing for one's body to be willing to do anything or accept any foreign object to escape from danger, or more energy to reach the peak once more, etc. Only temporarily, though. Normally, the body would not completely accept such foreign organ volunteeringly. It still needs a slight push from the outside. In this case, fear. After the genome had been temporarily accepted by the body system, it would also accept the changes to the body during that moment. As blood and water flows through the heart and then the genome, then directly to the body, one's stiff muscles would start loosening, the body would gradually get lighter, the locked and tightly bound joints would also start loosening. As the body would become slightly stronger. The main improvement that the xenograph gave is the flexibility of one's body, and the major improvement is one's agility. One's body would become very fast, almost triple that of their previous speed. One would be able to perform maneuver previously impossible for him or her previously, but not to the level of a world champion gymnastics or a professional stuntman. The higher one's heartbeat rate, the more one's body would continue to loosen. Even if the heartbeat rate decreases, the body's flexibility, agility, and strength would remain permanent like that. But to increase the rate at which the blood circulation through the first and the newly second heart, and then the body, would become progressively difficult. Basically, increasing one's rate of heartbeat would become more difficult. Making a cycle past the previous limit would become harder and harder. Although, if one forced himself too much, one might not necessarily have a heart attack. One's heart might just burst out into pieces directly due to the power overload. Only geniuses who had been trained by their families to perform gruesome and tiring exercises during their younger age would possibly have little problems reaching the limits of the stage, called spires. Spires is the name given to those who have been xenographed and are seeking to reach the limits of the human body. For those who aren't geniuses, there are evolutionary vials they could purchase from the Institute at an expensive price. The vials contain some type of fluid that could spike an increase in one's heartbeat sharply. It is only recommended to students who think they had encountered some bottleneck. In a simple definition, serums are concocted to contain a type of effect in which it gives a sudden increase one's heartbeat by giving a sudden jolt to the heart, which therefore spikes up the rate of heartbeat. Therefore, with even more velocity, the hearts would propel the blood at an even faster speed, whereby circulating and pumping warm red blood through the heart, which would then pass through the genome, xenographed into the subject's body. The blood that emerged from the second heart afterwards wasn't the same as the one that entered it in the first place. The blood that emerged always had a tinge of blackness within, turning it into a dark red colored blood if one could see through the body with a microscope, proving the blood had changed somewhat. After which, the dark red blood is then propelled and circulated through the veins, blood vessels, and arteries, then right into the body system. Wherever the blood passes, it would continue strengthening and transforming the body positively. And it also expand the meridians and blood vessels, making them stronger with time, toward the bones, tissues, muscles, cells, etc. The entirety of the subject's body would be transformed steadily. Following the increase in the number of circulation the subject's heart could propel. A normal human being can only circulate his bodily fluids and blood through the entire body 3 times in a single minute. That is the limit the heart of a regular and healthy human could achieve. The limit the heart could implement without the assistance of the genomes, nor the gradual process of transformation made alongside the body as blood is being pumped into the system, is only 3 times in a second. But for a newly made spryer, the amazing fact is that their hearts could propel blood throughout the entire body 5 times in a minute. And that was only when the subject's xenograft was just performed. The numbers of circulation would increase progressively as long as the subject is involved in an intense activity which could make one's heart beat faster than it normally would. For example, exercises such as jogging, running, sexual activities. Basically, any activity that helps increase the circulation of one's blood and heartbeat, which means a spryer could achieve 5 complete blood circulations in the body in just a minute, almost twice the amount of a regular person, making them superior to humans. And that was without performing any exercises yet. They could increase the amount by performing specifically intense activities. The vials made by the generic association contains some type of serum that had been concocted using special techniques and specific measurements, which is exclusive to only the generic association. The main function of serum is that it is used to spike up an increase in one's heartbeat sharply, which would in turn increase the velocity of one's blood circulation. It is only recommended to students who are wickedly rich and also impatient or think their rates of improvement were slow. So they get some from the institute with enough gyno points. Meanwhile, after being xenographed, there must be an external stimuli that would help force the body to accept the foreign object, which is where the institute's initiation or basically test come to place. The combat lessons instructor would help with the problem, giving them the external stimuli, which in David's instructor case, fear. Meanwhile, the instructor smirked in a bewitching manner as she looked towards her students, their faces filled with fear and wariness as they glanced down between their bodies and the instructor. So they get some from the institute with enough gyno points. Meanwhile, back to the instructor. Instructor Arella smirked slightly as she watched her students' fearful expression. All right, scaredy cats, listen up. That attack of mine was only an illusion. You all fell into my illusion when you stared into my eyes. The moment you all stared into my eyes was the moment the illusion started. The instructor explained. Although the illusion wasn't at all perfect since she needed them to stare into her eyes at a point in time, it was still enough to draw in the attention of the freshmen to the scene she had wanted them to see. But to do that, some of her actions has to be done physically, or it would be broken by these weak students of hers, as there might be doubts appearing in their hearts, which would be a huge disgrace to her. So to say, the part where she jumped 15 meters into the air, and also the part where the bone blades grew on her arm was also very real. But the part she slashed her blade toward the students were all real. It was only the transparent arc wind that was an illusion. It was impossible to create something like that in her current stage. Upon hearing her words, the students all heaved a long sigh of relief they aren't dead. David especially. He just came into this science-fictional fantasy world, and he hasn't even seen many things, tasted any foods, ride any cool cars. He wasn't in a hurry to leave as of yet. Not now, not ever. If he died when he had just come to this world, he would regret it extremely. When he was still blaming himself for not committing suicide if he knew he would be coming to this world. David's eyes spun as he thought. He glanced around to notice He wasn't the only one who was fearful of losing their lives. The other students were also relieved to hear that it was all an illusion. While some students who were elites also felt relieved, Nut refused to show it in their expression. They remained stoic, giving the impression that they weren't moved, even in the face of death. But the instructor could see right through them. For example, a student's hand was trembling unconsciously, and even when he tried to control it and cover it by crossing both his arms, the instructor still noticed it. Another couldn't help his feet from tapping, channeling his fears towards the physical to help calm himself down. Other elites were also like that. After David was calm enough, he couldn't help but think back to the stunts he had just performed just a minute ago. His eyes couldn't help but widen in astonishment and surprise. Diving backwards was a very simple thing to do, but the maneuver he pulled towards the end, in which he had twisted his body as if it was elastic or like a springboard where one pulled back towards one side building potential energy and then fire at an extreme speed towards the opposite direction due to kinetic energy. It was an amazing feat. After David was calm enough, he couldn't help but think back to the stunts he had just performed just a minute ago. His eyes couldn't help but widen in astonishment and surprise. Diving backwards was a very simple thing to do, but the maneuver he pulled towards the end, in which he twisted his body as if it was elastic or like a springboard where one pulled back towards one side building potential energy, then fire at an extreme speed towards the opposite direction due to kinetic energy. He didn't even think things through as he didn't have the time. It was life and death back at that moment. Normally, he would be unable to pull something like that off in a normal day as he wasn't that flexible. As he was about to think things through thoroughly, he raised his head up to listen as the voice of the instructor rang out once again, cutting through his thoughts. Instructor Ayala continued, "Currently, I would like to congratulate some of you for finally stepping onto the first and most important step in becoming an expert." She glanced towards the students. Her expression had long since turned stoic, while her eyes unconsciously turned towards one particular student of hers for a second. Her gaze in that moment was tinged with a hint of pity as she looked at him, but it immediately cleared up as if it had never been there. No one noticed at all. To those whose body already accepted the genome planted in them, she had seen their abilities during the test, and her personal artificial intelligence had already sent the list of students that successfully merged with the genome with their images directly to her brain. She soon spoke up once again while fixing her glasses with her snow-white little fingers. "Not to waste my time and energy, I won't list out names. Those of you who feel any changes to your body, it could increase in your flexibility, or if you feel that your body becomes lighter with every breath you take, or you feel a bit stronger, or lastly, you feel that your heartbeat has risen exponentially at one point in time, move to that place." She pointed toward the particular side of the field. Upon hearing her words, David immediately closed his eyes. He could feel that his heartbeat had risen, and although his heart rate was now calm, he remembered how fast it became when he thought that he was about to die. He also felt his body was getting stronger at each heartbeat. Although it was a tiny bit of increase, he could still feel it increase by a tiny amount. David's eyebrows furrowed as he felt something strange. He closed his eyes deeply and at the same time concentrated his focus to increase his senses. He suddenly noticed something strange and foreign and weird beating alongside his heart inside his body. He could exactly say what it was, but it felt like a second heart. Shock and interest appeared in David's eyes as he opened his eyes wide abruptly. He was about to check to confirm what he had just seen when a loud voice rang out from his front. "Be fast with that. Don't waste my time. Go now." Instructor Ella shouted as she glared at the students whose expression keeps in changing alike the light of a multicolored beam of light. Some of the students wore an incredulous score on their faces, as if they couldn't believe the things they had noticed, while some were happily performing stunts like backflips and front flips, which was now as easily as moving their hands. But upon listening to the instructor's words, without hesitation, they immediately scrambled towards the position the instructor had pointed towards in that instant. David also rushed to line up together the other students. As his body seemed light to him, and his strength which had slightly risen with the stomp of his foot, his body propelled him with too much force. He felt like he was flying. his body already tilted to one side due to the uncontrolled strength. If not for his quick wits like David likes to think, instead of his instincts, he would have crash-landed face first on the field. He immediately turned his legs and waist as he used the force to perform a backflips. As he landing on the ground while heaving a sigh of relief to the fact that he almost died. Going back to his formal position in the new line of students formed. He instantly felt a dangerously cold gaze. His body reacted instantly as his eyes drooped lowly. His body relaxed while his body entered his abnormal battle mode. He suddenly felt his blood circulation slowed down considerably, but the force at which his blood flowed and became heavy. His heartbeat thumped with a force that attempted to break through out of his chest. It was like a patient panther, ready to pounce at any given moment. The transformations happened in an instant. David was aware, but he didn't have the opportunity to confirm. He scanned his surroundings for the hidden enemy. But as his gaze swept past the students towards the instructor, he instantly saw the instructor glaring at him like an angry lioness. His heart immediately froze as he swiftly exited his combat mode, looking towards his shoes like it was an interesting piece of art. She had just shouted at the students to make haste and stop their nonsense, but this little bastard still deemed it fit to execute a backflip after she had just spoken. She felt she had been rudely disabled, but that anger was changed into suspicion and interest. With her keen gaze, she had clearly seen how his body seemed to relax, as if he was about to go to sleep, which was weird considering the fact that he had just performed a backflip. What was even weirder was that his heartbeat also slowed down, but each beat was immensely powerful. It was pumping blood at a slow but forceful manner, as though it was restraining itself, waiting for a single moment to suddenly strike, as though he was executing a combat technique. Instructor Ella was immediately surprised as she had never come across such situations before. She made a mental note as he AI recorded the images and scans it had gotten from him. Although it was unusual, it only made her about 2% interested in him.